Chapter 18. The Milagrosa. The affair at Maracaibo is to be considered as Captain Blood's buccaneering masterpiece. Although there is scarcely one of the many actions that he fought, recorded in such particular detail by Jeremy Pitt, which does not afford some instance of his genius for naval tactics, yet in none is this more shiningly displayed than in those two engagements by which he won out of the trap which Don Miguel de Espinosa had sprung upon him. The fame which he had enjoyed before this, great as it already was, is dwarfed into insignificance by the fame that followed. It was a fame such as no buccaneer, not even Morgan, has ever boasted, before or since. In Tortuga, during the months he spent there refitting the 3 ships he had captured from the fleet that had gone out to destroy him, he found himself almost an object of worship in the eyes of the wild brethren of the coast, all of whom now clamor for the honor of serving under him. It placed him in a rare position of being able to pick and choose the crews for his augmented fleet, and he chose fastidiously. When next he sailed away, it was with a fleet of 5 fine ships, in which went something over 1,000 men. Thus you behold him not merely famous, but really formidable. The 3 captured Spanish vessels he had renamed with a certain scholarly humor to Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, a grimly jocular manner of conveying to the world that he made them the arbiters of the fate of any Spaniards he should henceforth encounter upon the seas. In Europe the news of this fleet, following upon the news of the Spanish admiral's defeat at Maracaibo, produced something of a sensation. Spain and England were variously and unpleasantly exercised, and if you care to turn up the diplomatic correspondence exchanged on the subject, you will find that it is considerable and not always amiable. And meanwhile in the Caribbean, the Spanish Admiral Don Miguel de Espinosa might be said, to use a term not yet invented in his day, to have run amok. The disgrace into which he had fallen as a result of the disasters suffered at the hands of Captain Blood had driven the Admiral all but mad. It is impossible, if we impose our minds impartially, to withhold a certain sympathy from Don Miguel. Hate was now this unfortunate man's daily bread, and the hope of vengeance an obsession to his mind. As a madman, he went raging up and down the Caribbean seeking his enemy, and in the meantime, as an hors d'oeuvre to his vindictive appetite, he fell upon any ship of England or France that loomed above his horizon. I need say no more to convey the fact that this illustrious sea captain and great gentleman of Castile had lost his head, and was become a pirate in his turn. The Supreme Council of Castile might anon condemn him for his practices, but how should that matter to one who already was condemned beyond redemption? On the contrary, if he should live to lay the audacious and ineffable Blood by the heels, it was possible that Spain might view his present irregularities and earlier losses with more lenient eye. And so, reckless of the fact that Captain Blood was now in vastly superior strength, the Spaniards sought him up and down the trackless seas. But for a whole year, he sought him vainly. The circumstances in which eventually they met are very curious. An intelligent observation of the facts of human existence will reveal to shallow-minded folk who sneer at the use of coincidence in the arts of fiction and drama that life itself is little more than a series of coincidences. Open the history of the past at whatsoever page you will, and there you shall find coincidence at work, bringing about events that the merest chance might have averted. Indeed, coincidence may be defined as the very tool used by fate to shape the destinies of men and nations. Observe it now at work in the affairs of Captain Blood and of some others. On the September 15th of the year 1688, a memorable year in the annals of England, 3 ships were afloat upon the Caribbean, which in their coming conjunctions were to work out the fortunes of several persons. The first of these was Captain Blood's flagship, the Arabella, which had been separated from the buccaneer fleet in a hurricane off the Lesser Antilles. In somewhere about 17 degrees and lat and 74 degrees long, she was beating up for the windward passage before the intermittent southeasterly breezes of that stifling season, homing for Tortuga, the natural rendezvous of the dispersed vessels. The second ship was the great Spanish galleon, the Milagrosa, which, accompanied by the smaller frigate Hidalga, lurked off the Caymites to the north of the long peninsula that thrusts out from the southwest corner of Hispaniola. Aboard the Milagrosa sailed the vindictive Don Miguel. The third and last of these ships with which we are at present concerned was an English man-of-war, which on the date I have given was at anchor in the French port of St. Nicholas on the northwest coast of Hispaniola. She was on her way from Plymouth to Jamaica and carried on board a very distinguished passenger in the person of Lord Julian Wade, who came charged by his kinsman, my Lord Sunderland, with a mission of some consequence and delicacy, directly arising out of that vexatious correspondence between England and Spain. The French government, like the English, excessively annoyed by the depredations of the buccaneers and the constant straining of relations with Spain that ensued, had sought in vain to put them down by enjoining the utmost severity against them upon her various overseas governors. But these, either, like the governor Tortuga, throve out of a scarcely tacit partnership with the filibusters, or, like the governor of French Hispaniola, felt that they were to be encouraged as a check upon the power and greed of Spain, which might otherwise be exerted to the disadvantage of the colonies of other nations. They looked, indeed, with apprehension upon recourse to any vigorous measures which must result in driving many of the buccaneers to seek new hunting grounds in the South Sea. To satisfy King James's anxiety to conciliate Spain, and in response to the Spanish ambassador's constant and grievous expostulations, my Lord Sunderland, the Secretary of State, had appointed a strong man to the deputy governorship of Jamaica. This strong man was that Colonel Bishop, who for some years now had been the most influential planter in Barbados. Colonel Bishop had accepted the post and departed from the plantations in which his great wealth was being amassed with an eagerness that had its roots in a desire to pay off a score of his own with Peter Blood. From his first coming to Jamaica, Colonel Bishop had made himself felt by the buccaneers. But do what he might, the one buccaneer whom he made a particular quarry, that Peter Blood who once had been a slave, eluded him ever and continued undeterred and in great force to harass the Spaniards upon sea and land, and to keep the relations between England and Spain in a state of perpetual ferment, particularly dangerous in those days when the peace of Europe was precariously maintained. Exasperated not only by his own accumulated chagrin, but also by the reproaches for his failure which reached him from London, Colonel Bishop actually went so far as to consider hunting his quarry in Tortuga itself, and making an attempt to clear the island of the buccaneers it sheltered. Fortunately for himself, he abandoned the notion of so insane an enterprise, deterred not only by the enormous natural strength of the place, but also by the reflection that a raid upon what was, nominally at least, a French settlement, must be attended by grave offense to France. Yet short of some such measure, it appeared to Colonel Bishop that he was baffled. He confessed as much in a letter to the Secretary of State. This letter, in the state of things which it disclosed, made my Lord Sunderland despair of solving this vexatious problem by ordinary means. He turned to the consideration of extraordinary ones, and bethought him of the plan adopted with Morgan, who had been enlisted into the king's service under Charles II. It occurred to him that a similar course might be similarly effective with Captain Blood. His lordship did not omit the consideration that Blood's present outlawry might well have been undertaken not from inclination, but under stress of sheer necessity, that he had been forced into it by the circumstances of his transportation, and that he would welcome the opportunity of emerging from it. Acting upon this conclusion, Sunderland sent out his kinsman, Lord Julian Wade, with some commissions made out in blank, and full directions as to the course which the Secretary considered it desirable to pursue, and yet full discretion in the matter of pursuing them. The crafty Sunderland, master of all labyrinths of intrigue, advised his kinsman that in the event of his finding Blood intractable, or judging for other reasons that it was not desirable to enlist him in the king's service, he should turn his attention to the officers serving under him, and by seducing them away from him leave him so weakened that he must fall an easy victim to Colonel Bishop's fleet. The Royal Mary, the vessel bearing that ingenious, tolerably accomplished, mildly dissolute, entirely elegant envoy of my Lord Sunderland's, made a good passage to St. Nicholas, her last port call before Jamaica. It was understood that as a preliminary Lord Julian should report himself to the deputy governor at Port Royal, whence at need he might have himself conveyed to Tortuga. Now it happened that the deputy governor's niece had come to St. Nicholas some months earlier on a visit to some relatives, and so that she might escape the insufferable heat of Jamaica in that season, the time for her return being now at hand, a passage was sought for her aboard the Royal Mary, and in view of her uncle's rank and position promptly accorded. Lord Julian hailed her advent with satisfaction. It gave a voyage that had been full of interest for him just the spice that it required to achieve perfection as an experience. His lordship was one of your gallants to whom existence, that is not graced by womankind, is more or less of stagnation. Miss Arabella Bishop, The straight up and down slip of a girl with her rather boyish voice and her almost boyish ease of movement was not perhaps a lady who in England would commanded much notice in my lord's discerning eyes. His very sophisticated, carefully educated taste in such matters inclined him towards the plump, the languishing, and the quite helplessly feminine. Miss Bishop's charms were undeniable, but they were such that it would take a delicate-minded man to appreciate them, and my Lord Julian, whilst of a mind that was very far from gross, did not possess the necessary degree of delicacy. I must not by this be understood to imply anything against him. It remained, however, that Miss Bishop was a young woman and a lady, and in the latitude into which Lord Julian had strayed this was a phenomenon sufficiently rare to command attention. On his side, with his title and position, his personal grace and the charm of a practiced courtier, he bore about in the atmosphere of the great world in which normally he had his being, a world that was little more than a name to her, who had spent most of her life in the Antilles. It is not, therefore, wonderful that they should have been attracted to each other before the Royal Mary was warped out of St. Nicholas. Each could tell the other much upon which the other desired information. He could regale her imagination with stories of St. James's, in many of which he assigned himself a heroic, or at least a distinguished part, and she could enrich his mind with information concerning this new world to which he had come. Before they were out of sight of St. Nicholas, they were good friends, and his lordship was beginning to correct his first impressions of her and to discover the charm of that frank, straightforward attitude of comradeship which made her treat every man as a brother. Considering how his mind was obsessed with the business of his mission, it is not wonderful that he should have come to talk to her of Captain Blood. Indeed, there was a circumstance that directly led to it. "I wonder now," he said, as they were sauntering on the poop, "if you ever saw this fellow Blood, who was at one time on your uncle's plantations as a slave." Miss Bishop halted. She leaned upon the taffrail, looking out towards a receding land, and it was a moment before she answered in a steady, level voice. "I saw him often. I knew him very well." "You don't say." His lordship was slightly moved out of an imperturbability that he had studiously cultivated. He was a young man of perhaps 28, well above the middle height in stature, and appearing taller by virtue of his exceeding leanness. He had a thin, pale, rather pleasing hatchet face, framed in the curls of a golden periwig, a sensitive mouth and pale blue eyes that lent his countenance a dreamy expression, a rather melancholy pensiveness. But they were alert, observant eyes notwithstanding, although they failed on this occasion to observe the slight change of color which his question had brought to Miss Bishop's cheeks, or the suspiciously excessive composure of her answer. "You don't say," he repeated, and came to lean beside her. "And what manner of man did you find him?" "In those days I esteemed him for an unfortunate gentleman." "You were acquainted with his story?" "He told it me. That is why I esteemed him, for the calm fortitude with which he bore adversity. Since then, considering what he has done, I have almost come to doubt if what he told me of himself was true." "If you mean of the wrongs he suffered at the hands of the Royal Commission that tried the Monmouth rebels, there's little doubt that would be true enough. He was never out with Monmouth, that is certain. He was convicted on a point of law of which he may well have been ignorant when he committed what was construed into treason. But, faith, he's had his revenge, after a fashion. That," she said in a small voice, "is the unforgivable thing. It has destroyed him, deservedly." "Destroyed him?" His lordship laughed a little. "Be none so sure of that. He has grown rich. I hear he has translated, so it is said, his Spanish spoils into French gold, which is being treasured up for him in France. His future father-in-law, M. Diadron, has seen to that." "His future father-in-law," said she, and stared at him round-eyed, with parted lips, then added, "M. Diadron, the governor of Tortuga?" "The same. You see the fellow is well protected. It's a piece of news I gathered in St. Nicholas. I am not sure that I welcome it, for I am not sure that it makes any easier a task upon which my kinsman, Lord Sunderland, has set me hither. But there it is. You know—" She shook her head without replying. She had averted her face, and her eyes were staring down at the gently heaving water. After a moment she spoke, her voice steady and perfectly controlled. "But surely, if this were true, there would have been an end to his piracy by now. If he loved a woman and was betrothed and was also rich, as you say, surely he would have abandoned this desperate life. And Why? So I thought, his lordship interrupted, until I had the explanation. Dodgern is avaricious for himself and for his child. And as for the girl, I'm told she's a wild piece, fit mate for such a man as Blood. Almost I marvel that he doesn't marry her and take her roving with him. It would be no new experience for her. And I marvel, too, at Blood's patience. He killed a man to win her. He killed a man for her, do you say? There was horror now in her voice. Yes, a French buccaneer named Levasseur. He was the girl's lover and Blood's associate on a venture. Blood coveted the girl and killed Levasseur to win her. Pa, it's an unsavory tale, I own, but men live by different codes out in these parts. She had turned to face him. She was pale to the lips, and her hazel eyes were blazing as she cut into his apologies for Blood. They must, indeed, if his other associates allowed him to live after that. Oh, the thing was done in fair fight, I am told. Who told you? A man who sailed with them, a Frenchman named Cahusac, whom I found in a waterside tavern in St. Nicholas. He was Levasseur's lieutenant, and he was present on the island where the thing happened. And when Levasseur was killed, and the girl, did he say the girl was present too? Yes, she was a witness of the encounter. Blood carried her off when he had disposed of his brother Buccaneer, and the dead man's followers allowed it? He caught the note of incredulity in her voice, but missed the note of relief with which it was blent. Oh, I don't believe the tale. I won't believe it. I honor you for that, Miss Bishop. It strained my own belief that men should be so callous, until this Cahusac afforded me the explanation. What? She checked her unbelief, an unbelief that had uplifted her from an inexplicable dismay. Clutching the rail, she swung round to face his lordship with that question. Later he was to remember and perceive in her present behavior a certain oddness which went disregarded now. Blood purchased her consent and his right to carry the girl off. He paid them in pearls that were worth more than 20,000 pieces of 8. His lordship laughed again with a touch of contempt. A handsome price. Faith, they're scoundrels all, just thieving venal curs. And faith, it's a pretty tale this for a lady's ear. She looked away from him again and found that her sight was blurred. After a moment, in a voice less steady than before, she asked him, "Why should this Frenchman have told you such a tale? Did he hate this Captain Blood?" "I did not gather that," said his lordship slowly. "He related it, just as a commonplace, an instance of buccaneering ways." "A commonplace," said she. "My God, a commonplace." "I dare say that we are all savages under cloak that civilization fashions for us," said his lordship. "But this Blood, now, was a man of considerable parts, from what else this Cahusac told me. He was a bachelor of medicine. That is true, to my own knowledge, and he has seen much foreign service on sea and land. Cahusac said, though this I hardly credit, that he had fought under De Ruyter." "That also is true," said she. She sighed heavily. "Your Cahusac seems to have been accurate enough. Alas, you are sorry, then?" She looked at him. She was very pale. He noticed, "As we are sorry to hear the death of one we have esteemed. Once I held him in regard for an unfortunate but worthy gentleman. Now—" She checked, and smiled a little crooked smile. Such a man is best forgotten. And upon that she passed at once to speak of other things. The friendship, which it was her great gift to command in all she met, grew steadily between those two in the little time remaining, until the event befell that marred what was promising to be the pleasantest stage of his lordship's voyage. The marplot was the mad-dog Spanish admiral, whom they encountered on the second day out when halfway across the Gulf of Gonaives. The captain of the Royal Mary was not disposed to be intimidated, even when Don Miguel opened fire on him. Observing the Spaniard's plentiful seaboard towering high above the water and offering him so splendid a mark, the Englishman was moved to scorn. If this Don who flew the banner of Castile wanted to fight, the Royal Mary was just a ship to oblige him. It may be that he was justified of his gallant confidence, and that he would that day have put an end to the wild career of Don Miguel de Espinosa, but that a lucky shot from the Milagrosa got among some powder stored in his forecastle and blew up half his ship almost before the fight had started. How the powder came there will never now be known, and the gallant captain himself did not survive to inquire into it. Before the men of the Royal Mary had recovered from their consternation, their captain killed and a third of their number destroyed with him, the ship yawing and rocking helplessly in a crippled state. The Spaniards boarded her. In the captain's cabin under the poop, to which Miss Bishop had been conducted for safety, Lord Julian was seeking to comfort and encourage her with assurances that all would yet be well at the very moment when Don Miguel was stepping aboard. Lord Julian himself was none so steady, and his face was undoubtedly pale. Not that he was by any means a coward, but this cooped-up fighting on an unknown element in a thing of wood that might at any moment founder under his feet into the depths of ocean was disturbing to one who could be brave enough ashore. Fortunately, Miss Bishop did not appear to be in desperate need of the poor comfort he was in case to offer. Certainly she, too, was pale, and her hazel eyes may have looked a little larger than usual. But she had herself well in hand. Half sitting, half leaning on the captain's table, she preserved her courage sufficiently to seek to calm the octoroon waiting woman who was groveling at her feet in a state of terror. And then the cabin door flew open, and Don Miguel himself, tall, sunburned, and aquiline of face, strode in. Lord Julian span round to face him and clapped a hand to his sword. The Spaniard was brisk and to the point. "Don't be a fool," he said in his own tongue, "or you'll come by a fool's end. Your ship is sinking." There were 3 or 4 men in moorings behind Don Miguel, and Lord Julian realized the position. He released his hilt, and a couple of feet or so of steel slid softly back into the scabbard. But Don Miguel smiled, with a flash of white teeth behind his grizzled beard, and held out his hand. "If you please," he said. Lord Julian hesitated. His eyes strayed to Miss Bishop's. "I think you had better," said that composed young lady, whereupon with a shrug his lordship made the required surrender. "Come you, all of you, aboard my ship." Don Miguel invited them and strode out. They went, of course. For one thing, the Spaniard had force to compel them. For another, a ship which he announced to be sinking offered them little inducement to remain. They stayed no longer than was necessary to enable Miss Bishop to collect some spare articles of dress, and my lord to snatch up his valise. As for the survivors in that ghastly shambles that had been the Royal Mary, they were abandoned by the Spaniards to their own resources. Let them take to the boats, and if those did not suffice them, let them swim or drown. If Lord Julian and Miss Bishop were retained, it was because Don Miguel perceived their obvious value. He received them in his cabin with great urbanity. Urbanely, he desired to have the honor of being acquainted with their names. Lord Julian, sick with horror of the spectacle he had just witnessed, commanded himself with difficulty to supply them. Then haughtily he demanded to know, in his turn, the name of their aggressor. He was in an exceedingly ill temper. He realized that if he had done nothing positively discreditable in the unusual and difficult position into which fate had thrust him, at least he had done nothing creditable. This might have mattered less, but that the spectator of his indifferent performance was a lady. He was determined, if possible, to do better now. "I am Don Miguel de Espinosa," he was answered, "Admiral of the navies of the Catholic King." Lord Julian gasped. If Spain made such a hubbub about the depredations of a renegade adventurer like Captain Blood, what could not England answer now? "Will you tell me, then, why you behave like a damned pirate?" he asked, and added, "I hope you realize what will be the consequences, and the strict account to which you shall be brought for this day's work, for the blood you have murderously shed, and for your violence to this lady and to myself." "I offer you no violence," said the Admiral, smiling, as only the man who holds the trumps can smile. "On the contrary, I have saved your lives." "Saved our lives." Lord Julian was momentarily speechless before such callous impudence. "And what are the lives you have destroyed in wanton butchery? By God, man, they shall cost you dear." Don Miguel's smile persisted. "It is possible. All things are possible. Meantime, it is your own lives that will cost you dear. Colonel Bishop is a rich man, and you, my lord, are no doubt also rich. I will consider and fix your ransom. So that you're just a damn murderous pirate, I was supposing you," stormed his lordship. "And you have the impudence to call yourself the Admiral of the navies of the Catholic King? We shall see what your Catholic King will have to say to it." The Admiral ceased to smile. He revealed something of the rage that had eaten into his brain. "You do not understand," he said. It is that I treat you English heretic dogs just as you English heretic dogs have treated Spaniards upon the seas. You robbers and thieves out of hell. I have the honesty to do it in my own name. But you perfidious beasts, you send your Captain Bloods, your Hagthorpes, and your Morgans against us and disclaim responsibility for what they do. Like Pilate, you wash your hands. He laughed savagely. Let Spain play the part of Pilate. Let her disclaim responsibility for me. When your ambassador at the Escurial shall go whining to the Supreme Council of this act of piracy by Don Miguel de Espinosa. Captain Blood and the rest are not admirals of England, cried Lord Julian. Are they not? How do I know? How does Spain know? Are you not liars all, you English heretics? Sir, Lord Julian's voice was harsh as a rasp. His eyes flashed. Instinctively, he swung a hand to the place where his sword habitually hung. Then he shrugged and sneered. Of course, said he. It sorts with all I have heard of Spanish honor and all that I have seen of yours that you should insult a man who is unarmed and your prisoner. The admiral's face flamed scarlet. He half raised his hand to strike. And then, restrained perhaps by the very words that cloaked the retorting insult, he turned on his heel abruptly and went out without answering. Chapter 19. The Meeting. As the door slammed after the departing admiral, Lord Julian turned to Arabella and actually smiled. He felt that he was doing better and gathered from an almost childish satisfaction. Childish in all the circumstances. Decidedly, I think I had the last word there, he said, with a toss of his golden ringlets. Miss Bishop, seated at the cabin table, looked at him steadily, without returning his smile. Does it matter, then, so much having the last word? I am thinking of those poor fellows on the Royal Mary. Many of them have had their last word. Indeed. And for what? A fine ship sunk, a score of lives lost, thrice that number now in jeopardy, and all for what? You are overwrought, ma'am. Aye, overwrought. She uttered a single sharp note of laughter. I assure you I am calm. I am asking you a question, Lord Julian. Why has the Spaniard done all this? To what purpose? You heard him. Lord Julian shrugged angrily. Bloodlust, he explained shortly. Bloodlust, she asked. She was amazed. Does such a thing exist then? It is insane, monstrous. Fiendish, his lordship agreed. Devil's work. I don't understand. At Bridgetown 3 years ago there was a Spanish raid, and things were done that should have been impossible to men, horrible, revolting things which strain belief, which seem, when I think of them now, like the illusions of some evil dream. Are men just beasts? Men, said Lord Julian, staring. Say Spaniards, and I'll agree. He was an Englishman speaking of hereditary foes, and yet there was a measure of truth in what he said. This is the Spanish way in the New World. Faith! Almost it justifies such men as blood of what they do. She shivered as if cold, and setting her elbows on the table, she took her chin in her hands, and sat staring before her. Observing her, his lordship noticed how drawn and white her face had grown. There was reason enough for that, and for worse. Not any other woman of his acquaintance would have preserved her self-control in such an ordeal, and of fear at least at no time had Miss Bishop shown any sign. It is impossible that he did not find her admirable. A Spanish steward entered bearing a silver chocolate service and a box of Peruvian candies, which he placed on the table before the lady. With the admiral's homage, he said, then bowed and withdrew. Miss Bishop took no heed of him or his offering, but continued to stare before her, lost in thought. Lord Julian took a turn in the long, low cabin, which was lighted by a skylight above and great square windows astern. It was luxuriously appointed. There were rich Eastern rugs on the floor, well-filled bookcases stood against the bulkheads, and there was a carved walnut sideboard laden with silverware. On a long, low chest standing under the middle stern port lay a guitar that was gay with ribbons. Lord Julian picked it up, twanged the strings once as if moved by nervous irritation, and put it down. He turned again to face Miss Bishop. I came out here, he said, to put down piracy. But, bliss to me, I begin to think that the French are right in desiring piracy to continue as a curb upon these Spanish scoundrels. He was to be strongly confirmed in that opinion before many hours were passed. Meanwhile, their treatment at the hands of Don Miguel was considerate and courteous. It confirmed the opinion, contemptuously expressed to his lordship by Miss Bishop that since they were to be held to ransom, they need not fear any violence or hurt. A cabin was placed at the disposal of the lady and her terrified woman, and another at Lord Julian's. They were given the freedom of the ship and bidden to dine at the admiral's table. Nor were his further intentions regarding the mentioned, nor yet his immediate destination. The Milagrosa, with her consort the Hidalgo rolling after her, steered a south by westerly course, then veered to the southeast round Cape Tiburon, and thereafter, standing well out to sea, with the land no more than a cloudy outline to larboard, she headed directly east, and so ran straight into the arms of Captain Blood, who was making for the windward passage, as we know. That happened early on the following morning, after having systematically hunted his enemy in vain for a year. Don Miguel chanced upon him in this unexpected and entirely fortuitous fashion. But that is the ironic way of fortune. It was also the way of fortune that Don Miguel should thus come upon the Arabella at a time when, separated from the rest of the fleet, she was alone and at a disadvantage. It looked to Don Miguel as if the luck which so long had been on Blood's side had at last veered in his own favor. Miss Bishop, newly risen, had come out to take the air on the quarter-deck with his lordship in attendance, as you expect of so gallant a gentleman, when she beheld the big red ship that had once been the Cinco Lagos Atacades. The vessel was bearing down upon them, her mountains of snowy canvas bellying forward, the long pennon with the cross of St. George fluttering from her main truck in the morning breeze, the gilded portholes in her red hull, and the gilded beak-head of flash in the morning sun. Miss Bishop was not to recognize this or that same Cinco Lagos which she had seen once before, on a tragic day in Barbados 3 years ago. To her it was just a great ship that was heading resolutely, majestically towards them, and an Englishman to judge by the pennon she was flying. The sight thrilled her curiously. It awoke in her an uplifting sense of pride that took no account of the danger to herself in the encounter that must now be inevitable. Beside her on the poop, whither they had climbed to obtain a better view, and equally arrested in her gaze, stood Lord Julian. But he shared none of her exultation. He had been in his first sea fight yesterday, and he felt that the experience would suffice him for a very considerable time. This, I insist, is no reflection upon his courage. "Look," said Miss Bishop, pointing, and to his infinite amazement he observed that her eyes were sparkling. Did she realize, he wondered, what was afoot? Her next sentence resolved his doubt. She is English, and she comes resolutely on. She means to fight. God help her, then, said his lordship gloomily. Her captain must be mad. What can he hope to do against 2 such heavy hulks as these? If they could so easily blow the Royal Mary out of the water, what will they do to this vessel? Look at that devil Don Miguel. He's utterly disgusting in his glee. From the quarter-deck, where he moved amid the frenzy of preparation, the admiral had turned to flash a backward glance at his prisoners. His eyes were alight, his face transfigured. He flung out an arm to point to the advancing ship, and bawled something in Spanish that was lost to them in the noise of the laboring crew. They advanced to the poop rail and watched the bustle. Telescope in hand on the quarter-deck, Don Miguel was issuing his orders. Already the gunners were kindling their matches. Sailors were aloft, taking in sail. Others were spreading a stout rope net above the waist, as a protection against falling spars. And meanwhile Don Miguel had been signaling to his consort, in response to which the Hidalgo had drawn steadily forward until she was now abeam of the Milagrosa, half cable's length to starboard, and from the height of the tall poop my lord and Miss Bishop could see her own bustle of preparation, and they could discern signs of it now aboard the advancing English ship as well. She was furling tops and mainsail, stripping in fact to mizzen and sprit for the coming action. Thus, almost silently without challenge or exchange of signals, had action been mutually determined. Of necessity now, under diminished sail, the advance of the Arabella was slower, but it was none the less steady. She was already within saker shot, and they could make out the figures stirring on her forecastle and the brass guns gleaming on her prow. The gunners of the Milagrosa raised their linstocks and blew upon their smoldering matches, looking up impatiently at the admiral. But the admiral solemnly shook his head. "Patience," he exhorted them. "Save your fire until we have him. He is coming straight to his doom, straight to yardarm and the rope that had been so long waiting for him." "Stab me," said his lordship. "This Englishman may be gallant enough to accept battle against such odds, But there are times when discretion is a better quality than gallantry in a commander. Gallantry will often win through, even against overwhelming strength, said Miss Bishop. He looked at her and noted in her bearing only excitement. Of fear, he could still discern no trace. His lordship was past amazement. She was not by any means the kind of woman to which life had accustomed him. Presently, he said, "You will suffer me to place you under cover." "I can see best from here," she answered him, and added quietly, "I am praying for this Englishman. He must be very brave." Under his breath, Lord Julian damned the fellow's bravery. The Arabella was advancing now along a course which, if continued, must carry her straight between the two Spanish ships. My lord pointed it out. "He's crazy, surely," he cried. "He's driving straight into a death trap. He'll be crushed to splinters between the two. No wonder that black-faced Don is holding his fire. In his place, I should do the same." But even at that moment, the admiral raised his hand. In the waist, below him, a trumpet blared, and immediately the gunner on the prow touched off his guns. As the thunder of them rolled out, his lordship saw ahead beyond the English ship, and a larboard of her two heavy splashes. Almost at once, two successive spurts of flame leapt from the brass cannon on the Arabella's beakhead, and scarcely had the watchers on the poop seen the shower of spray, where one of the shots struck the water near them. Then, with a rending crash and shiver that shook the Milagrosa from stem to stern, the other came to lodge in her forecastle. To avenge that blow, the Hidalga blazed at the Englishman with both her forward guns. But even at that short range, between 200 and 300 yards, neither shot took effect. At 100 yards, the Arabella's forward guns, which had meanwhile been reloaded, fired again at the Milagrosa, and this time smashed her bowsprit into splinters, so that for a moment she yawed wildly to port. Don Miguel swore profanely, and then, as the helm was put over to swing her back to her course, his own prow replied. But the aim was too high, and whilst one of the shots tore through the Arabella's shrouds and scarred her mainmast, the other again went wide. And when the smoke of that discharge had lifted, the English ship was found almost between the Spaniards, her bows in line with theirs, and coming steadily on into what his lordship deemed a death trap. Lord Julian held his breath, and Miss Bishop gasped, clutching the rail before her. She had a glimpse of the wickedly grinning face of Don Miguel, and the grinning faces of the men at the guns in the waist. At last the Arabella was right between the Spanish ship's prow, to poop and poop to prow. Don Miguel spoke to the trumpeter, who had mounted the quarter-deck and stood now at the admiral's elbow. The man raised a silver bugle that was to give the signal for the broadsides of both ships. But even as he placed it to his lips, the admiral seized his arm to arrest him. Only then had he perceived what was so obvious, or should have been to an experienced sea fighter. He had delayed too long, and Captain Blood had outmaneuvered him. In attempting to fire now upon the Englishman, the Milagrosa and her consort would also be firing into each other. Too late, he ordered his helmsman to put the tiller hard over and swing the ship to larboard as a preliminary to maneuvering for a less impossible position of attack. At that very moment, the Arabella seemed to explode as she swept by. 18 guns from each of her flanks emptied themselves at that point-blank range into the hulls of the two Spanish vessels. Half stunned by that reverberating thunder, and thrown off her balance by the sudden lurch of the ship under her feet, Miss Bishop hurtled violently against Lord Julian, who kept his feet only by clutching the rail on which he had been leaning. Billowing clouds of smoke to starboard blotted out everything, and its acrid odor, taking them presently in the throat, set them gasping and coughing. From the grim confusion and turmoil in the waist below arose a clamor of fierce Spanish blasphemies and the screams of maimed men. The Milagrosa staggered slowly ahead, a gaping rent in her bulwarks. Her foremast was shattered, fragments of the yards hanging in the netting spread below. Her beakhead was in splinters, and a shot had smashed through into the great cabin, reducing it to wreckage. Don Miguel was bawling orders wildly, and peering ever and anon to the curtain of smoke that was drifting slowly astern, in his anxiety to ascertain how it might have fared with the Hidalga. Suddenly, and ghostly at first through that lifting haze, loomed the outline of a ship. Gradually the lines of her red hull became more and more sharply defined as she swept nearer with poles all bare save a spread of canvas on her sprit. Instead of holding to her course as Don Miguel had expected she would, the Arabella had gone about under cover of the smoke, and sailing now in the same direction as the Milagrosa, was converging sharply upon her across the wind. So sharply that almost before the frenzied Don Miguel had realized the situation, his vessel staggered under the rending impact with which the other came hurtling alongside. There was a rattle and clank of metal as a dozen grapnels fell and tore and caught in the timbers of the Milagrosa, and the Spaniard was firmly gripped in the tentacles of the English ship. Beyond her, and now well astern the veil of smoke, was Wren at last, and the Hidalga was revealed in desperate case. She was bilging fast, with an ominous list of larboard, and it could be no more than a question of moments before she settled down. The attention of her hands was being entirely given to a desperate endeavor to launch the boats in time. Of this Don Miguel's anguished eyes had no more than a fleeting but comprehensive glimpse before his own decks were invaded by a wild, yelling swarm of boarders from the grappling ship. Never was confidence so quickly changed into despair. Never was Hunter more swiftly converted into helpless prey. For helpless the Spaniards were. The swiftly executed boarding maneuver had caught them almost unawares in the moment of confusion, following the punishing broadside they had sustained at such short range. For a moment there was a valiant effort by some of Don Miguel's officers to rally the men for a stand against these invaders. But the Spaniards, never at their best in close-quarter fighting, were here demoralized by knowledge of the enemies with whom they had to deal. Their hastily formed ranks were smashed before they could be steadied, driven across the waist of break of the poop on the one side, and up to the forecastle bulkheads on the other. The fighting resolved itself into a series of skirmishes between groups. And whilst this was doing above, another horde of buccaneers swarmed to the hatch to the main deck below to overpower the gun crews at their stations there. On the quarter deck, towards which an overwhelming wave of buccaneers was sweeping, led by a one-eyed giant, who was naked to the waist, stood Don Miguel, numb by despair and rage. Above and behind him on the poop, Lord Julian and Miss Bishop looked on, his lordship aghast at the fury of this cooped-up fighting. The lady's brave calm conquered at last by horror, so that she reeled there sick and faint. Soon, however, the rage of that brief fight was spent. They saw the banner Castile come fluttering down from the masthead. A buccaneer had slashed the halyard with his cutlass. The boarders were in possession, and on the upper deck groups of disarmed Spaniards stood huddled now like herded sheep. Suddenly Miss Bishop recovered from her nausea, to lean forward staring wild-eyed, whilst if possible her cheeks turned yet a deadlier hue than they had been already. Picking his way daintily through that shambles in the waist came a tall man with a deeply tanned face that was shaded by a Spanish headpiece. He was armed in back and breast of black steel, beautifully damascened with golden arabesques. Over this, like a stole, he wore a sling of scarlet silk, from each end of which hung a silver-mounted pistol. Up the broad companion to the quarter-deck he came, toying with easy assurance, until he stood before the Spanish admiral. Then he bowed stiff and formally. A crisp, metallic voice, speaking perfect Spanish, reached those two spectators on the poop and increased the admiring wonder in which Lord Julian had observed the man's approach. "We meet again at last, Don Miguel," it said. "I hope you're satisfied. Although the meeting may not be exactly as you pictured it, at least it has been very ardently sought and desired by you." Speechless, livid of face, his mouth distorted, and his breathing labored, Don Miguel de Espinosa received the irony of that man to whom he attributed his ruin and more beside. Then he uttered an inarticulate cry of rage, and his hand swept to his sword. But even as his fingers closed upon the hilt, the others closed upon his wrist to arrest the action. "Come, Don Miguel," he was quietly but firmly enjoined. "Do not recklessly invite the ugly extreme such as you would, yourself, have practiced had the situation been reversed." A moment they stood looking into each other's eyes. "What do you intend by me?" the Spaniard inquired at last, his voice hoarse. Captain Blood shrugged. The firm lips smiled a little. "All that I intend has been already accomplished. And lest it increase your rancor, I beg you to observe that you have brought it entirely upon yourself. You would have it so." He turned and pointed to the boats, which his men were heaving from the boom amidships. "Your boats are being launched. You are at liberty to embark in them with your men before we scuttle this ship. Yonder are the shores of Hispaniola. You should make them safely. And if you'll take my advice, sir, you'll not hunt me again. I think I am unlucky to get you home to Spain, Don Miguel, and it concerns that you understand better than this trade of the sea." For a long moment, the defeated admiral continued to stare his hatred in silence. Then, still without speaking, he went down the companion, staggering like a drunken man, his useless rapier clattering behind him. His conqueror, who had not even troubled to disarm him, watched him go, then turned and faced those two immediately above him on the poop. Lord Julian might have observed, had he been less taken up with other things, that the fellow seemed suddenly to stiffen, and that he turned pale under his deep tan. A moment he stood at gaze. Then suddenly and swiftly he came up the steps. Lord Julian stood forward to meet him. "You don't mean, sir, that you'll let that Spanish scoundrel go free?" he cried. The gentleman in the black corselet appeared to become aware of his lordship for the first time. "And who the devil may you be?" he asked, with a marked Irish accent. "And what business may it be of yours at all?" His lordship conceived that the fellow's truculence and utter lack of proper deference must be corrected. "I am Lord Julian Wade," he announced, with that object. Apparently the announcement made no impression. "Are you indeed? Then perhaps you'll explain what the plague you're doing aboard this ship?" Lord Julian controlled himself to afford the desired explanation. He did so shortly and impatiently. "He took you prisoner." "Did he, along with Miss Bishop there?" "You are acquainted with Miss Bishop?" cried his lordship, passing from surprise to surprise. But this mannerless fellow had stepped past him and was making a leg to the lady, who on her side remained unresponsive and forbidding to the point of scorn. Observing this, he turned to answer Lord Julian's question. "I had that honor once," said he, "but it seems that Miss Bishop has a shorter memory." His lips were twisted into a wry smile, and there was pain in the blue eyes that gleamed so vividly under his black brows, pain blending with the mockery of his voice. But of all this it was the mockery alone that was perceived by Miss Bishop. She resented it. "I do not number thieves and pirates among my acquaintance, Captain Blood," said she, whereupon his lordship exploded in excitement. "Captain Blood," he cried. "Are you Captain Blood? What else were you supposing?" Blood asked the question wearily, his mind on other things. "I do not number thieves and pirates among my acquaintance." The cruel phrase filled his brain, re-echoing and reverberating there. But Lord Julian would not be denied. He caught him by the sleeve with one hand, whilst with the other he pointed after the retreating, dejected figure of Don Miguel. "Do I understand that you're not going to hang that Spanish scoundrel?" "What for should I be hanging him?" "Because he's just a damn pirate, as I have proved already." "Ah!" said Blood, and Lord Julian marveled at the sudden haggardness of a countenance that had been so devil-may-care but a few moments since. "I am a damn pirate myself, and so I am merciful with my kind. Don Miguel goes free." Lord Julian gasped. "After what I've told you that he has done? After his sinking of the Royal Mary? After his treatment of me, of us?" Lord Julian protested indignantly. "I am not in the service of England or of any nation, sir, and I am not concerned with any wrongs her flag may suffer." His lordship recoiled before the furious glance that blazed at him out of Blood's haggard face. But the passion faded as swiftly as it had arisen. It was in a level voice that the captain added, "If you'll escort Miss Bishop aboard my ship, I shall be obliged to you. I beg that you'll make haste. We are about to scuttle this hulk." He turned slowly to depart. But again Lord Julian interposed. Containing his indignant amazement, his lordship delivered himself coldly. "Captain Blood, you disappoint me. I had hopes of great things for you." "Go to the devil," said Captain Blood, turning on his heel, and so departed. Chapter 20. Thief and Pirate. Captain Blood paced the poop of his ship alone in the tepid dusk, and the growing golden radiance of the great poop lantern in which a seaman had just lighted the 3 lamps. About him all was peace. The signs of the day's battle had been effaced, the decks had been swabbed, and order was restored above and below. A group of men squatting about the main hatch were drowsily chanting, their hardened natures softened, perhaps, by the calm and beauty of the night. They were the men of the larboard watch, waiting for 8 bells which was imminent. Captain Blood did not hear them. He did not hear anything save the echo of those cruel words which had dubbed him thief and pirate. Thief and pirate. It is an odd fact of human nature that a man may for years possess the knowledge that a certain thing must be of a certain fashion, and yet be shocked to discover through his own senses that the fact is in perfect harmony with his beliefs. When first, 3 years ago, at Tortuga, he had been urged upon the adventurous course which he had followed ever since. He had known in what opinion Arabella Bishop must hold him if he succumbed. Only the conviction that already she was forever lost to him, by introducing a certain desperate recklessness into his soul, had supplied the final impulse to drive him upon his rover's course. That he should ever meet her again had not entered his calculations, had found no place in his dreams. They were, he conceived, irrevocably and forever parted. Yet, in spite of this, in spite even of the persuasion that to her this reflection that was his torment could bring no regrets, he had kept the thought of her ever before him in all those wild years of filibustering. He had used it as a curb not only upon himself, but also upon those who followed him. Never had buccaneers been so rigidly held in hand. Never had they been so firmly restrained. Never so debarred from the excesses of rapine and lust that were usual in their kind as those who sailed with Captain Blood. It was, you will remember, stipulated in their articles that in these, as in other matters, they must submit to the commands of their leader. And because of the singular good fortune which had attended his leadership, he had been able to impose that stern condition of a discipline unknown before among buccaneers. How would not these men laugh at him now if he were to tell them that this he had done out of respect for a slip of a girl of whom he had fallen romantically enamored? How would not that laughter swell if he added that this girl had that day informed him that she did not number thieves and pirates among her acquaintance? Thief and pirate. How the words clung, how they stung and burned his brain. It did not occur to him, being no psychologist, nor learned the tortuous workings of the feminine mind, that the fact that she should bestow upon him those epithets in the very moment and circumstance of their meeting was in itself curious. He did not perceive the problem thus presented. Therefore he could not probe it. Else he might have concluded that if in a moment in which by delivering her from captivity he deserved her gratitude, yet she expressed herself in bitterness, it must be because that bitterness was anterior to the gratitude and deep-seated. She had been moved to it by hearing of the course he had taken. Why? It was what he did not ask himself, or some ray of light might have come to brighten his dark, his utterly evil despondency. Surely she would never have been so moved had she not cared. Had she not felt that in what he did there was a personal wrong to herself? Surely, he might have reasoned, nothing short of this could have moved her to such a degree of bitterness and scorn as that which she had displayed. That is how you will reason. Not so, however, reasoned Captain Blood. Indeed, that night he reasoned not at all. His soul was given up to conflict between the almost sacred love he had borne her in all these years and the evil passion which she had now awakened in him. Extremes touch, and in touching may for a space become confused, indistinguishable, and the extremes of love and hate were tonight so confused in the soul of Captain Blood that in their fusion they made up a monstrous passion. Thief and pirate, that was what she deemed him, without qualification, oblivious of the deep wrongs he had suffered, the desperate case in which he found himself after his escape from Barbados, and all the rest that had gone to make him what he was. That he should have conducted his filibustering with hands as clean as were possible to a man engaged in such undertakings had also not occurred to her as a charitable thought with which to mitigate her judgment on man she had once esteemed. She had no charity for him, no mercy. She had summed him up, convicted him, and sentenced him in that one phrase. He was thief and pirate in her eyes. Nothing more, nothing less. What, then, was she? What are those who have no charity? He asked the stars. Well, as she had shaped him hitherto, so let her shape him now. Thief and pirate, she had branded him. She should be justified. Thief and pirate should he prove henceforth, no more nor less, as bowelless, as remorseless, as all those others who had deserved those names. He would cast out the maudlin ideals by which he had sought to steer a course, put an end to this idiotic struggle to make the best of two worlds. She had shown him clearly to which world he belonged. Let him now justify her. She was aboard his ship, in his power, and he desired her. He laughed softly, jeeringly, as he leaned on the taffrail, looking down at the phosphorescent gleam in the ship's wake, and his own laughter startled him by its evil note. He checked suddenly and shivered. A sob broke from him to end that ribald burst of mirth. He took his face in his hands and found a chill moisture on his brow. Meanwhile, Lord Julian, who knew the feminine part of humanity rather better than Captain Blood, was engaged in solving the curious problem that had so completely escaped the buccaneer. He was spurred to it, I suspect, by certain vague stirrings of jealousy. Miss Bishop's conduct and the perils through which they had come had brought him at last to perceive that a woman may lack the simpering graces of cultured femininity, and yet because of that lack be the more admirable. He wondered what precisely might have been her earlier relations with Captain Blood, and was conscious of a certain uneasiness which urged him now to probe the matter. His lordship's pale, dreamy eyes had, as I have said, a habit of observing things, and his wits were tolerably acute. He was blaming himself now for not having observed certain things before, or at least for not having studied them more closely, and he was busily connecting them with more recent observations made that very day. He had observed, for instance, that Blood's ship was named the Arabella, and he knew that Arabella was Miss Bishop's name, and he had observed all the odd particulars of the meeting of Captain Blood and Miss Bishop, and the curious change that meeting had wrought in each. The lady had been monstrously uncivil to the captain. It was a very foolish attitude for a lady in her circumstances to adopt toward a man in Blood's, and his lordship could not imagine Miss Bishop as normally foolish. Yet, in spite of her rudeness, in spite of the fact that she was a niece of a man whom Blood must regard as his enemy, Miss Bishop and his lordship had been shown the utmost consideration aboard the captain's ship. A cabin had been placed at the disposal of each, to which their scanty remaining belongings and Miss Bishop's woman had been duly transferred. They were given the freedom of the great cabin, and they had sat down at table with Pitt, the master, and Wolverstone, who was Blood's lieutenant, both of whom had shown them the utmost courtesy. Also, there was the fact that Blood himself had kept almost studiously from intruding upon them. His lordship's mind went swiftly but carefully down these avenues of thought, observing and connecting. Having exhausted them, he decided to seek additional information from Miss Bishop. For this, he must wait until Pitt and Wolverstone should have withdrawn. He was hardly made to wait so long, for as Pitt rose from table to follow Wolverstone, who had already departed, Miss Bishop detained him with a question. "Mr. Pitt," she asked, "were you not one of those who escaped from Barbados with Captain Blood?" I, too, was one of your uncle's slaves. And you have been with Captain Blood ever since?" "His shipmaster always, ma'am." She nodded. She was very calm and self-contained. But his lordship observed that she was unusually pale, though considering what she had that day undergone, this afforded no matter for wonder. "Did you ever sail with a Frenchman named Cahusac?" "Cahusac?" Pitt laughed. The name evoked a ridiculous memory. "Aye, he was with us at Maracaibo." "And another Frenchman named Levasseur?" His lordship marveled at her memory of these names. "Aye, Cahusac was Levasseur's lieutenant, until he died." "Until who died?" "Levasseur. He was killed on one of the Virgin Islands 2 years ago." There was a pause. Then, in an even quieter voice than before, Miss Bishop asked, "Who killed him?" Pitt answered readily. There was no reason why he should not, though he began to find the catechism intriguing. "Captain Blood killed him." "Why?" Pitt hesitated. It was not a tale for a maid's ears. "They quarreled," he said shortly. "Was it about a lady?" Miss Bishop relentlessly pursued him. "You might put it that way. What was the lady's name?" Pitt's eyebrows went up. Still he answered, "Miss Diodron. She was the daughter of the governor of Tortuga. She had gone off with his fellow Levasseur, and Peter delivered her out of his dirty clutches. He was a black-hearted scoundrel, and deserved what Peter gave him." "I see. And yet Captain Blood has not married her." "Not yet," laughed Pitt, who knew the utter groundlessness of the common gossip in Tortuga, which pronounced Mdli. "Diodron, the captain's future wife." Miss Bishop nodded in silence, and Jeremy Pitt turned to depart, relieved that the catechism was ended. He paused in the doorway to impart a piece of information. "Maybe it'll comfort you to know that the captain has altered our course for your benefit. It's his intention to put you both ashore on the coast of Jamaica, as near Port Royal as we dare venture. We've gone about, and if this wind holds, you'll soon be home again, mistress." "Vastly obliging of him," drawled his lordship, seeing that Miss Bishop made no shift to answer. Somber-eyed she sat, staring into vacancy. "Indeed, you may say so," Pitt agreed. "He's taking risks that few would take in his place." But that's always been his way. He went out, leaving his lordship pensive, those dreamy blue eyes of his intently studying Miss Bishop's face for all their dreaminess, his mind increasingly uneasy. At length Miss Bishop looked at him and spoke. "Your Cahusac told you no more than the truth, it seems. I perceive that you were testing it," said his lordship. "I am wondering precisely why." Receiving no answer, he continued to observe her silently, his long, tapering fingers toying with a ringlet of the golden periwig in which his long face was set. Miss Bishop sat bemused, her brows knit, her brooding glance seeming to study the fine Spanish point that edged the tablecloth. At last his lordship broke the silence. "He amazes me, this man," said he in his slow, languid voice that never seemed to change its level. "That he should alter his course for us is in itself matter for wonder, but that he should take a risk on our behalf, that he should venture into Jamaica waters. It amazes me, as I have said." Miss Bishop raised her eyes and looked at him. She appeared to be very thoughtful. Then her lip flickered curiously, almost scornfully, it seemed to him. Her slender fingers drummed the table. "What is still more amazing is that he does not hold us to ransom," said she at last. "It's what you deserve." "Oh, and why, if you please?" "For speaking to him as you did. I usually call things by their names." "Do you? Stab me. I shouldn't boast of it. It argues either extreme youth or extreme foolishness. His lordship, you see, belonged to my Lord Sunderland's school of philosophy," he added after a moment. "So does a display of ingratitude." A faint color stirred in her cheeks. "Your lordship is evidently aggrieved with me. I am disconsolate. I hope your lordship's grievance is sounder than your views of life. It is news to me that ingratitude is a fault only to be found in the young and the foolish." "I didn't say so, ma'am." There was a tartness in his tone, evoked by the tartness she had used. "If you would do me the honor to listen, you would not misapprehend me. For if, unlike you, I do not always say precisely what I think, at least I say precisely what I wish to convey. To be ungrateful may be human, but to display it is childish. I don't think I understand." Her brows were knit. "How have I been ungrateful, and to whom?" "To whom?" "To Captain Blood. Didn't he come to our rescue?" "Did he?" Her manner was frigid. "I wasn't aware that he knew of our presence aboard the Milagrosa." His lordship permitted himself the slightest gesture of impatience. "You are probably aware that he delivered us," said he. "And living as you have done in these savage places of the world, you can hardly fail to be aware of what is known even in England, that this fellow Blood strictly confines himself to making war upon the Spaniards. So that to call him thief and pirate, as you did, was to overstate the case against him at a time when it would have been more prudent to have understated it." "Prudence?" Her voice was scornful. "What have I to do with prudence?" "Nothing, as I perceive. But, at least, study generosity. I tell you frankly, ma'am, that in Blood's place I should never have been so nice. Sink me, when you consider what he has suffered at the hands of his fellow countrymen, you may marvel with me that he should trouble to discriminate between Spanish and English, to be sold into slavery. Ugh!" His lordship shuddered. "And to a damned colonial planter." He checked abruptly. "I beg your pardon, Miss Bishop. For the moment, you were carried away by your heat in defense of this sea robber." Miss Bishop's scorn was almost fierce. His lordship stared at her again. Then he half closed his large, pale eyes and tilted his head a little. "I wonder why you hate him so," he said softly. He saw the sudden scarlet flame upon her cheeks, the heavy frown that descended upon her brow. He had made her very angry, he judged. But there was no explosion. She recovered. "Hate him? Lord, what a thought! I don't regard the fellow at all." "Then ye should, ma'am." His lordship spoke his thought frankly. "He's worth regarding. He'd be an acquisition to the King's Navy, a man that can do the things he did this morning. His service under the Reuter wasn't wasted on him. That was a great seaman, and, bliss to me, the pupil's worthy the master if I am a judge of anything. I doubt if the Royal Navy can show his equal to thrust himself deliberately between those two at point-blank range, and so turn the tables on them. It asks courage, resource, and invention, and we landlubbers were not the only ones he tricked by his maneuver. That Spanish admiral never guessed the intent until it was too late, and Blood held him in check. A great man, Miss Bishop, a man worth regarding. Miss Bishop was moved to sarcasm. You should use your influence with my Lord Sunderland to have the king offer him a commission. His lordship laughed softly. Faith, it's done already. I have a commission in my pocket. And he increased her amazement by a brief exposition of the circumstances. In that amazement, he left her and went in quest of blood, but he was still intrigued. If she were a little less uncompromising in her attitude towards blood, his lordship would have been happier. He found the captain pacing the quarter-deck, a man mentally exhausted from wrestling with the devil, although of this particular occupation his lordship could have no possible suspicion. With the amiable familiarity he used, Lord Julian slipped an arm through one of the captains and fell into step beside him. What's this? Snapped Blood, whose mood was fierce and raw. His lordship was not disturbed. I desire, sir, that we be friends, said he suavely. That's mighty condescending of you. Lord Julian ignored the obvious sarcasm. It's an odd coincidence that we should have been brought together in this fashion, considering that I came out to the Indies especially to seek you. You're not by any means the first to do that. The other scoffed. But they've mainly been Spaniards, and they hadn't your luck. You misapprehend me completely, said Lord Julian, and on that he proceeded to explain himself and his mission. When he had done, Captain Blood, who until that moment had stood still under the spell of his astonishment, disengaged his arm from his lordship's and stood squarely before him. You're my guest aboard this ship, said he, and I still have some notion of decent behavior left me from other days, thief and pirate though I may be. So I'll not be telling you what I think of you for daring to bring me this offer, or my Lord Sunderland, since he's your kinsman for having the impudence to send it. But it does not surprise me at all that one who is a minister of James Stuart's should conceive that every man is to be seduced by bribes into betraying those who trust him. He flung out an arm in the direction of the waist, whence came the half-melancholy chant of the lounging buccaneers. Again you misapprehend me, cried Lord Julian, between concern and indignation. That is not intended. Your followers will be included in your commission. Endy, you think they'll go with me to hunt their brethren, the brethren of the coast? On my soul, Lord Julian, it is yourself does the misapprehending. Are there not even notions of honor left in England? Oh, and there's more to it than that, even. Do you think I could take a commission of King James's? I tell you I wouldn't be soiling my hand with it. Thief and pirate's hands though they be. Thief and pirate is what you heard Miss Bishop call me today. A thing of scorn, an outcast. And who made me that? Who made me thief and pirate? If you were a rebel? His lordship was beginning. You must know that I was no such thing, no rebel at all. It wasn't even pretended. If it were, I could forgive them. But not even that cloak could they cast upon their foulness. Oh, no, there was no mistake. I was convicted for what I did, neither more nor less. That bloody vampire Jeffreys, bad cess to him, sentenced me to death, and his worthy master James Stuart afterwards sent me into slavery, because I performed an act of mercy, because compassionately and without thought for creed or politics I had sought to relieve the sufferings of fellow creature, because I had dressed the wounds of a man who was convicted of treason. That was all my offense. You'll find it in the records. And for that I was sold into slavery, because by the law of England, as administered by James Stuart in violation of the laws of God, who harbors or comforts a rebel is himself adjudged guilty of rebellion. Gee, dream man, what it is to be a slave. He checked suddenly at the very height of his passion. A moment he paused, then cast it from him as if it had been a cloak. His voice sank again. He uttered a little laugh of weariness and contempt. But there, I grow hot for nothing at all. I explain myself, I think, and God knows it is not my custom. I am grateful to you, Lord Julian, for your kindly intentions. I am so, but you'll understand, perhaps, you look as if you might. Lord Julian stood still. He was deeply stricken by the other's words, the passionate, eloquent outburst that in a few sharp, clear-cut strokes had so convincingly presented a man's bitter case against humanity, his complete apologia and justification for all that could be laid to his charge. His lordship looked at that keen, intrepid face gleaming lividly in the light of the great poop lantern, and his own eyes were troubled. He was abashed. He fetched a heavy sigh. "A pity," he said slowly. "Oh, blister me, accursed pity. He held out his hand, moved to it on a sudden, generous impulse. "But no offense between us, Captain Blood. Oh, no offense. But I'm a thief and a pirate." He laughed without mirth, and, disregarding the proffered hand, swung on his heel. Lord Julian stood a moment, watching the tall figure as it moved away toward the taffrail. Then, letting his arms fall helplessly to his sides in dejection, he departed. Just within the doorway of the alley leading to the cabin, he ran into Miss Bishop, yet she had not been coming out, for her back was towards him, and she was moving in the same direction. He followed her, his mind too full of Captain Blood to be concerned just then with her movements. In the cabin, he flung into a chair and exploded, with a violence altogether foreign to his nature. Damn if ever I met a man I liked better, or even a man I liked as well. Yet there's nothing to be done with him. "So I heard," she admitted in a small voice. She was very white, and she kept her eyes upon her folded hands. He looked up in surprise, and then sat conning her with brooding glance. "I wonder now," he said presently, "if the mischief is of your working. Your words have rankled with him. He threw them at me again and again. He wouldn't take the king's commission. He wouldn't take my hand even. What's to be done with a fellow like that? He'll end on a yardarm for all his luck. And the quixotic fool is running into danger at the present moment on our behalf." "How?" she asked him with a sudden startled interest. "How? Have you forgotten that he's sailing to Jamaica, and that Jamaica is the headquarters of the English fleet? True, your uncle commands it." She leaned across the table to interrupt him, and he observed that her breathing had grown labored, that her eyes were dilating in alarm. "But there is no hope for him in that," she cried. "Oh, don't imagine it. He has no bitter enemy in the world. My uncle is a hard, unforgiving man. I believe that it was nothing but the hope of taking and hanging Captain Blood that made my uncle leave his Barbados plantations to accept the deputy governorship of Jamaica. Captain Blood doesn't know that, of course." She paused with a little gesture of helplessness. "I can't think that it would make the least difference if he did," said his lordship gravely. "A man who can forgive such an enemy as Don Miguel and take up this uncompromising attitude with me isn't to be judged by ordinary rules. He's chivalrous to the point of idiocy. And yet he has been what he has been and done what he has done in these last 3 years," said she, but she said it sorrowfully now, without any of her earlier scorn. Lord Julian was sententious, as I gather that he often was. "Life can be infernally complex," he sighed. Chapter 21. The Service of King James. Miss Arabella Bishop was aroused very early on the following morning by the brazen voice of a bugle and the insistent clanging of a bell in the ship's belfry. As she lay awake, idly watching the rippled green water that appeared to be streaming past the heavily glazed porthole, she became gradually aware of the sounds of swift, labored bustle, the clatter of many feet, the shouts of hoarse voices, and the persistent trundlings of heavy bodies in the wardroom immediately below the deck of the cabin. Conceiving these sounds to pretend a more than normal activity, she sat up, pervaded by a vague alarm, and roused her still slumbering woman. In his cabin on the starboard side, Lord Julian, disturbed by the same sounds, was already astir and hurriedly dressing. When presently he emerged on the break of the poop, he found himself staring up into a mountain of canvas. Every foot of sail that she could carry had been crowded to the Arabella's yards to catch the morning breeze. Ahead and on either side stretched a limitless expanse of ocean, sparkling golden in the sun, as yet no more than a half disk of flame upon the horizon straight ahead. About him in the waist, where all last night had been so peaceful, there was a frenziedly active bustle of some 80 men. By the rail, immediately above and behind Lord Julian, stood Captain Blood in altercation with a one-eyed giant, whose head was swathed in a red cotton kerchief, whose blue shirt hung open at the waist. As his lordship, moving forward, revealed himself, their voices ceased and Blood turned to greet him. "Good morning to you," he said, and added, "I've blundered badly. So I have. I should have known better than to come so close to Jamaica by night. But I was in haste to land you. Come up here. I have something to show you." Wondering, Lord Julian mounted companion as he was bidden. Standing beside Captain Blood, he looked astern, following the indication of the captain's hand, and cried out in his amazement, "There, Not more than 3 miles away was land, an uneven wall of vivid green that filled the western horizon, and a couple of miles aside of it, bearing after them, came speeding 3 great white ships. They fly no colors, but they're part of the Jamaica fleet. Blood spoke without excitement, almost with a certain listlessness. When dawn broke, we found ourselves running to meet them. We went about, and it's been a race ever since. But the Arabella has been at sea these 4 months, and her bottom's too foul for the speed we're needing. Wolverstone hooked his thumbs into his broad leather belt, and from his great height looked down sardonically upon Lord Julian, tall man though his lordship was, so that you're like to be in yet another fight afore ye done wise ships, my lord. That's a point we were just arguing, said Blood, for I hold that we're in no case to fight against such odds. The odds be damned. Wolverstone thrust out his heavy jowl. We're used to odds. The odds was heavier at Maracaibo. Yet we won out and took 3 ships. They was heavier yesterday when we engaged Don Miguel. Aye, but those were Spaniards. And what better are these? Are ye afeard of the lovely Barbados planter? Whatever ails you, Peter? I've never known ye scared afore. A gun boomed out behind them. That'll be the signal to lie to, said Blood, in the same listless voice, and he fetched a sigh. Wolverstone squared himself defiantly before his captain. I'll see Colonel Bishop in hell, or ever I lies to for him. And he spat, presumably for purposes of emphasis. His lordship intervened. Oh, but by your leave, surely there is nothing to be apprehended from Colonel Bishop, considering the service you have rendered to his niece and to me. Wolverstone's horse laugh interrupted him. Hark to the gentleman, he mocked. You don't know Colonel Bishop. That's clear. Not for his niece, not for his daughter, not for his own mother. Would he forego the blood, what he thinks due to him? A drinker of blood. He is a nasty beast. We knows the captain and me. We been his slaves. But there's myself, said Lord Julian with great dignity. Wolverstone laughed again, whereat his lordship flushed. He was moved to raise his voice above its usual languid level. I assure you that my word counts for something in England. Oh, aye, in England. But this ain't England, damn. Came the roar of a second gun, and a round shot splashed the water less than half a cable's length astern. Blood leaned over the rail to speak to the fair young man immediately below him by the helmsman at the whipstaff. Bid them take in sail, Jeremy, he said quietly. We lied to. But Wolverstone interposed again. Hold there a moment, Jeremy, he roared. Wait. He swung back to face the captain, who had placed a hand on his shoulder and was smiling a trifle wistfully. Steady, old wolf. Steady. Captain Blood admonished him. Steady yourself, Peter. You've ye gone mad. Will ye doom us all to hell out of tenderness for that cold slip of a girl? Stop, cried Blood in sudden fury. But Wolverstone would not stop. It's the truth, you fool. It's that cursed petticoats making a coward of you. It's for her that ye're afeard. And she, Colonel Bishop's niece. My God, man, ye'll have a mutiny aboard, and I'll lead it myself sooner than surrender to be hanged in Port Royal. Their glances met, sullen defiance braving dull anger, surprise, and pain. There is no question, said Blood, of surrender for any man aboard save only myself. If Bishop can report to England that I am taken and hanged, he will magnify himself and at the same time gratify his personal rancor against me. That should satisfy him. I'll send him a message offering to surrender aboard his ship, taking Miss Bishop and Lord Julian with me, but only on condition that the Arabella is allowed to proceed unharmed. It's a bargain that he'll accept, if I know him at all. It's a bargain he'll never be offered, retorted Wolverstone, and his earlier vehemence was as nothing to his vehemence now. You're surely daft even to think of it, Peter. Not so daft as you when you talk of fighting that. He flung out an arm as he spoke to indicate the pursuing ships, which were slowly but surely creeping nearer. Before we've run another half-mile, we shall be within range. Wolverstone swore elaborately, then suddenly checked. Out of the tail of his single eye he had espied a trim figure in gray silk that was ascending the companion. So engrossed had they been that they had not seen Miss Bishop come from the door of the passage leading to the cabin. And there was something else that those 3 men on the poop and Pitt immediately below them had failed to observe, Some moments ago, Ogle, followed by the main body of his gun deck crew, had emerged from the booby hatch to fall into muttered, angrily vehement talk with those who, abandoning the gun tackles upon which they were laboring, had come to crowd about him. Even now, Blood had no eyes for that. He turned to look at Miss Bishop, marveling a little, after the manner in which yesterday she had avoided him, that she should now venture upon the quarter-deck. Her presence at this moment, and considering the nature of his altercation with Wolverstone, was embarrassing. Very sweet and dainty she stood before him in her gown of shimmering gray, a faint excitement tinting her fair cheeks and sparkling in her clear, hazel eyes that looked so frank and honest. She wore no hat, and the ringlets of her gold-brown hair fluttered distractingly in the morning breeze. Captain Blood bared his head and bowed silently in a greeting which he returned composedly and formally. "What is happening, Lord Julian?" she inquired. As if to answer her, a third gun spoke from the ships towards which she was looking intent and wonderingly. A frown rumpled her brow. She looked from one to the other of the men who stood there so glum and obviously ill at ease. "They are ships of the Jamaica fleet," his lordship answered her. It should in any case have been a sufficient explanation. But before more could be added, their attention was drawn at last to Ogle, who came bounding up the broad ladder, and to the men lounging aft in his wake, in all of which, instinctively, they apprehended a vague menace. At the head of the companion, Ogle found his progress barred by Blood, who confronted him, a sudden sternness in his face and in every line of him. "What's this?" the captain demanded sharply. "Your station is on the gun deck. Why have you left it?" Thus challenged, the obvious truculence faded out of Ogle's bearing, quenched by the old habit of obedience and the natural dominance that was a secret of the captain's rule over his wild followers. But it gave no pause to the gunner's intention. If anything, it increased his excitement. "Captain," he said, and as he spoke he pointed to the pursuing ships, "Colonel Bishop holds us. We're in no case either to run or fight." Blood's height seemed to increase, as did his sternness. "Ogle," said he, in a voice cold and sharp as steel, "your station is on the gun deck. You'll return to it at once, and take your crew with you, or else." But Ogle, violent of mien and gesture, interrupted him. "Threats will not serve, Captain." Will they not? It was the first time in his buccaneering career that an order of his had been disregarded, or that a man had failed in the obedience to which he pledged all those who joined him. That this insubordination should proceed from one of those whom he most trusted, one of his old Barbados associates, was in itself a bitterness, and made him reluctant to that which instinct told him must be done. His hand closed over the butt of one of the pistols slung before him. "Nor will that serve you," Ogle warned him, still more fiercely. "The men are of my thinking, and they'll have their way. And what way may that be? The way to make us safe. We'll neither sink nor hang whiles we can help it." From the 3 or 4 score men massed below in the waist came a rumble of approval. Captain Blood's glance raked the ranks of those resolute, fierce-eyed fellows. Then it came to rest again on Ogle. There was here quite plainly a vague threat, a mutinous spirit he could not understand. "You come to give advice, then, do you?" quoth he, relenting nothing of his sternness. "That's it, Captain. Advice? That girl there." He flung out a bare arm to point to her. "Bishop's girl, the governor of Jamaica's niece. We want her as a hostage for our safety." "Aye!" roared in chorus the buccaneers below, and one or two of them elaborated that affirmation. In a flash Captain Blood saw what was in their minds, and for all that he lost nothing of his outward stern composure, fear invaded his heart. "And how," he asked, "do you imagine that Miss Bishop will prove such a hostage? It's a providence having her aboard, a providence." Heave to "Captain," and signal them to send a boat, and assure themselves that Miss is here. Then let them know that if they attempt to hinder our sailing hence, we'll hang the doxy first and fight for her after. That'll cool Colonel Bishop's heat, maybe. And maybe it won't. Slow and mocking came Wolverstone's voice to answer the other's confident excitement, and as he spoke he advanced to Blood's side, an unexpected ally. Some of them dawcocks may believe that tale. He jerked a contemptuous thumb towards the men in the waist, whose ranks were steadily being increased by the advent of others from the forecastle. Although even some they should know better, for there's still a few was on Barbados with us, and are acquainted like me and you with Colonel Bishop. If you're counting on pulling Bishop's heartstrings, you're a bigger fool, Ogle, than I've always thought you was with anything but guns. There's no heaving to for such a matter as that unless you wants to make quite sure of our being sunk. Though we had a cargo of bishops, nieces it wouldn't make him hold his hand. Why, as I was just telling his lordship here, who thought like you that having Miss Bishop aboard would make us safe, not for his mother would that filthy slaver forego what's due to him. And if ye were to fool, Ogle, you wouldn't need me to tell you this. We got to fight, my lads. How can we fight, man? Ogle stormed at him, furiously battling the conviction which Wolverstone's argument was imposing upon his listeners. You may be right and you may be wrong. We've got to chance it. It's our only chance. The rest of his words were drowned in the shouts of the hands, insisting that the girl be given up to be held as a hostage. And then louder than before roared a gun away to leeward, and away on their starboard beam they saw the spray flung up by the shot, which had gone wide. They are within range, cried Ogle, and leaning from the rail, put down the helm, he commanded. Pitt, at his post beside the helmsman, turned intrepidly to face the excited gunner. Since when have you commanded on the main deck? Ogle, I take my orders from the captain. You'll take this order from me, or by God, you'll... Wait, Blood bade him, interrupting, and he set a restraining hand upon the gunner's arm. There is, I think, a better way. He looked over his shoulder, aft, at the advancing ships, the foremost of which was now a bare quarter of a mile away. His glance swept in passing over Miss Bishop, and Lord Julian standing side by side some paces behind him. He observed her pale and tense, with parted lips and startled eyes that were fixed upon him, an anxious witness of this deciding of her fate. He was thinking swiftly, reckoning the chances, if by pistoling Ogle he were to provoke a mutiny, that some of the men would rally to him. He was sure, but he was no less sure that the main body would oppose him, and prevail in spite of all that he could do, taking the chance that holding Miss Bishop to ransom seemed to afford them. And if they did that one way or the other, Miss Bishop would be lost. For even if Bishop yielded to their demand, they would retain her as a hostage. Meanwhile, Ogle was growing impatient, his arm still gripped by Blood. He thrust his face into the captain's. What better way? He demanded. There is none better. I'll not be bubbled by what Wolverstone has said. He may be right, and he may be wrong. We'll test it. It's our only chance, I've said, and we must take it. The better way that was in Captain Blood's mind was the way that already he had proposed to Wolverstone. Whether the men in the panic Ogle had aroused among them would take a different view from Wolverstone's, he did not know. But he saw quite clearly now that if they consented, they would not on that account depart from their intention in the matter of Miss Bishop. They would make a Blood's own surrender merely an additional card in this game against the governor of Jamaica. It's through her that we're in this trap, Ogle stormed on. Through her and through you. It was to bring her to Jamaica that you risked all our lives, and we're not going to lose our lives as long as there's a chance to make ourselves safe through her. He was turning again to the helmsman below, when Blood's grip tightened on his arm. Ogle wrenched it free, with an oath. But Blood's mind was now made up. He had found the only way, and repellent though it might be to him, he must take it. That is a desperate chance, he cried. Mine is the safe and easy way. Wait! He leaned over the rail. Put the helm down, he bade Pitt. Heave her to, and signal to them to send a boat. A silence of astonishment fell upon the ship, of astonishment and suspicion at this sudden yielding. But Pitt, although he shared it, was prompt to obey. His voice rang out, giving the necessary orders, and after an instant's pause, a score of hands sprang to execute them. Came the creak of blocks and the rattle of slatting sails as they swung aweather, and Captain Blood turned and beckoned Lord Julian forward. His lordship, after a moment's hesitation, advanced in surprise and mistrust, a mistrust shared by Miss Bishop, who, like his lordship and all else aboard, though in a different way, had been taken aback by Blood's sudden submission to the demand to lie to. Standing now at the rail, with Lord Julian beside him, Captain Blood explained himself. Briefly and clearly he announced to all the object of Lord Julian's voyage to the Caribbean, and he informed them of the offer which yesterday Lord Julian had made to him. That offer I rejected, as his lordship will tell you, deeming myself affronted by it. Those of you who have suffered under the rule of King James will understand me. But now in the desperate case in which we find ourselves, outsailed and likely to be outfought, as Ogle has said, I am ready to take the way of Morgan, to accept the king's commission and shelter us all behind it. It was a thunderbolt that for a moment left them all dazed. Then Babel was reenacted. The main body of them welcomed the announcement, as only men who have been preparing to die can welcome a new lease of life. But many could not resolve one way or the other until they were satisfied upon several questions, and chiefly upon one which was voiced by Ogle. Will Bishop respect a commission when you hold it? It was Lord Julian who answered, it will go very hard with him if he attempts to flout the king's authority. And though he should dare attempt it, be sure that his own officers will not dare to do other than oppose him. Aye, said Ogle, that is true. But there were some who were still in open and frank revolt against the course. Of these was Wolverstone, who at once proclaimed his hostility. I'll rot in hell or ever I serves the king, he bawled in a great rage. But Blood quieted him and those who thought as he did. No man need follow me into the king's service who is reluctant. That is not in the bargain. What is in the bargain is that I accept this service with such of you as may choose to follow me. Don't think I accept it willingly. For myself, I am entirely of Wolverstone's opinion. I accept it as the only way to save us all from the certain destruction into which my own act may have brought us. And even those of you who do not choose to follow me shall share the immunity of all, and shall afterwards be free to depart. Those are the terms upon which I sell myself to the king. Let Lord Julian, the representative of the Secretary of State, say whether he agrees to them. Prompt, eager, and clear came his lordship's agreement, and that was practically the end of the matter. Lord Julian, the but now of good-humoredly ribald jests and half-derisive acclamations, plunged away to his cabin for commission, secretly rejoicing at a turn of events which enabled him so creditably to discharge the business on which he had been sent. Meanwhile, the boatswain signaled to the Jamaica ships to send a boat, and the men in the waist broke their ranks and went noisily flocking to line the bulwarks and view the great stately vessels that were racing down towards them. As Ogle left the quarter-deck, Blood turned and came face to face with Miss Bishop. She had been observing him with shining eyes, but at sight of his dejected countenance and the deep frown that scarred his brow, her own expression changed. She approached him with a hesitation entirely unusual to her. She set a hand lightly upon his arm. You have chosen wisely, sir, she commended him, however much against your inclinations. He looked with gloomy eyes upon her for whom he had made this sacrifice. I owed it to you, or thought I did, he said. She did not understand. Your resolve delivered me from a horrible danger, she admitted, and she shivered at the memory of it. But I do not understand why you should have hesitated when first it was proposed to you. It is an honorable service. King James's, he sneered. England's. She corrected him in reproof. The country is all, sir. The sovereign naught. King James will pass. Others will come and pass. England remains, to be honorably served by her sons, whatever rancor they may hold against the man who rules her in their time. He showed some surprise. Then he smiled a little. Shrewd advocacy. He approved it. You should have spoken to the crew. And then, the note of irony deepening in his voice, do you suppose now that this honorable service might redeem one who was a pirate and a thief? Her glance fell away. Her voice faltered a little in replying. If he needs redeeming, perhaps he has been judged too harshly. The blue eyes flashed, and the firm lips relaxed their grim set. Why, if you think that, he said, considering her, an odd hunger in his glance, life might have its uses, after all, and even the service of King James might become tolerable. Looking beyond her, across the water, he observed a boat putting off from one of the great ships, which, hove to now, were rocking gently some 300 yards away. Abruptly his manner changed. He was like one recovering, taking himself in hand again. If you will go below and get your gear and your woman, you shall presently be sent aboard one of the ships of the fleet. He pointed to the boat as he spoke. She left him, and thereafter with Wolverstone leaning upon the rail, he watched the approach of that boat, manned by a dozen sailors, and commanded by a scarlet figure seated stiffly in the stern sheets. He leveled his telescope upon that figure. It'll not be Bishop himself, said Wolverstone, between question and assertion. No. Blood closed his telescope. I don't know who it is. Ha! Wolverstone vented an ejaculation of sneering mirth. For all his eagerness, Bishop be none so willing to come hisself. He's been aboard this hulk afore, and we made him swim for it that time. He'll have his memories. So he sends a deputy. This deputy proved to be an officer named Calverley, a vigorous, self-sufficient fellow, comparatively fresh from England, whose manner made it clear that he came fully instructed by Colonel Bishop upon the matter of how to handle the pirates. His air, as he stepped into the waist of the Arabella, was haughty, truculent, and disdainful. Blood, the king's commission now in his pocket, and Lord Julian standing beside him, waited to receive him, and Captain Calverley was a little taken aback at finding himself confronted by two men so very different outwardly from anything that he had expected. But he lost none of his haughty poise, and scarcely deigned a glance at the swarm of fierce, half-naked fellows lounging in a semicircle to form a background. "Good day to you, sir," Blood hailed him pleasantly. "I have the honor to give you welcome aboard the Arabella. My name is Blood, Captain Blood, at your service. You may have heard of me." Captain Calverley stared hard. The airy manner of this redoubtable buccaneer was hardly what he had looked for in a desperate fellow, compelled to ignominious surrender. A thin, sour smile broke on the officer's haughty lips. "You'll ruffle it to the gallows, no doubt," he said contemptuously. "I suppose that is after the fashion of your kind. Meanwhile, it's your surrender I require, my man, not your impudence." Captain Blood appeared surprised, pained. He turned in appeal to Lord Julian. "Do ye hear that now? And did ye ever hear the like? But what did I tell ye? Ye see, the young gentleman's under a misapprehension entirely. Perhaps it'll save broken bones if your lordship explains just who and what I am." Lord Julian advanced a step and bowed perfunctorily and rather disdainfully to that very disdainful but now dumbfounded officer. Pitt, who watched the scene from the quarter-deck rail, tells us that his lordship was as grave as a parson at a hanging. But I suspect this gravity for a mask under which Lord Julian was secretly amused. "I have the honor to inform you, sir," he said stiffly, "that Captain Blood holds a commission in the King's service under the seal of my Lord Sunderland, His Majesty's Secretary of State." Captain Calverley's face empurpled. His eyes bulged. The buccaneers in the background chuckled and crowed and swore among themselves in their relish of this comedy. For a long moment Calverley stared in silence at his lordship, observing the costly elegance of his dress, his air of calm assurance, and his cold, fastidious speech, all of which savored distinctly of the great world to which he belonged. "And who the devil may you be?" he exploded at last. Colder still and more distant than ever grew his lordship's voice. "You're not very civil, sir, as I have already noticed. My name is Wade, Lord Julian Wade. I am His Majesty's envoy to these barbarous parts, and my Lord Sunderland's near kinsman. Colonel Bishop has been notified of my coming." The sudden change in Calverley's manner at Lord Julian's mention of his name showed that the notification had been received, and that he had knowledge of it. I believe that he has," said Calverley, between doubt and suspicion. "That is, that he has been notified of the coming of Lord Julian Wade. But, aboard the ship?" The officer made a gesture of helplessness, and, surrendering to his bewilderment, fell abruptly silent. "I was coming out on the Royal Mary. That is what we were advised. But the Royal Mary fell a victim to a Spanish privateer, and I might never have arrived at all but for the gallantry of Captain Blood, who rescued me." Light broke upon the darkness of Calverley's mind. "I see. I understand. I will take leave to doubt it." His lordship's tone abetted nothing of its asperity. "But that can wait. If Captain Blood will show you his commission, perhaps that will set all doubts at rest, and we may proceed. I shall be glad to reach Port Royal." Captain Blood thrust a parchment under Calverley's bulging eyes. The officer scanned it, particularly the seals and signature. He stepped back, a baffled, impotent man. He bowed helplessly. "I must return to Colonel Bishop for my orders," he informed them. At that moment a lane was open in the ranks of the men, and through this came Miss Bishop, followed by her octoroon woman. Over his shoulder Captain Blood observed her approach. "Perhaps, since Colonel Bishop is with you, you will convey his niece to him. Miss Bishop was aboard the Royal Mary also, and I rescued her together with his lordship. She will be able to acquaint her uncle with the details of that and of the present state of affairs. Swept thus from surprise to surprise, Captain Calverley could do no more than bow again. "As for me," said Lord Julian, with intent to make Miss Bishop's departure free from all interference on the part of the buccaneers, "I shall remain aboard the Arabella until we reach Port Royal. My compliments to Colonel Bishop. Say that I look forward to making his acquaintance there." Chapter 22. Hostilities. In the great harbor of Port Royal, spacious enough to have given moorings to all the ships of all the navies of the world, the Arabella rode at anchor. Almost she had the air of a prisoner. For a quarter of a mile ahead, to starboard, rose the lofty, massive, single-round tower of the fort, whilst a couple of cables length astern, and to larboard rode the 6 men of war that composed the Jamaica squadron. Abeam with the Arabella, across the harbor, were the flat-fronted white buildings of that imposing city that came down to the very water's edge. Behind these the red roofs rose like terraces, marking the gentle slope upon which the city was built, dominated here by a turret, there by a spire, and behind these again a range of green hills with for ultimate background a sky that was like a dome of polished steel. On a cane day bed that had been set for him on the quarter-deck, sheltered from the dazzling, blistering sunshine by an improvised awning of brown sailcloth, lounged Peter Blood, a calf-bound, well-thumbed copy of Horace's Odes Neglected in his hands. From immediately below him came the swish of mops and the gurgle of water in the scuppers, for it was still early morning, and under the directions of Hayton, the boatswain, the swabbers were at work in the waist and forecastle. Despite the heat and the stagnant air, one of the toilers found breath to croak a ribald buccaneering ditty. Blood fetched a sigh, and the ghost of a smile played over his lean, sun-tanned face. Then the black brows came together above the vivid blue eyes, and thought swiftly closed the door upon his immediate surroundings. Things had not sped at all well with him in the past fortnight, since his acceptance of the King's commission. There had been trouble with Bishop from the moment of landing, as Blood and Lord Julian had stepped ashore together. They had been met by a man who took no pains to dissemble his chagrin at the turn of events and his determination to change it. He awaited them on the mole, supported by a group of officers. "You are Lord Julian Wade, I understand," was his truculent greeting. For Blood at the moment, he had nothing beyond a malignant glance. Lord Julian bowed. "I take it I have the honor to address Colonel Bishop, Deputy Governor Jamaica." It was almost as if his lordship were giving the colonel a lesson in deportment. The colonel accepted it, and belatedly bowed, removing his broad hat. Then he plunged on. "You have granted, I am told, the King's commission to this man." His very tone betrayed the bitterness of his rancor. "Your motives were no doubt worthy, your gratitude to him for delivering you from the Spaniards. But the thing itself is unthinkable, my lord. The commission must be cancelled." "I don't think I understand," said Lord Julian distantly. "To be sure you don't, or you'd never ha' done it. The fellow's bubbled you. Why, he's first a rebel, then an escaped slave, and lastly a bloody pirate. I've been hunting him this year past. I assure you, sir, that I was fully informed of all. I do not grant the King's commission lightly." "Don't you, by God? And what else do you call this? But as His Majesty's Deputy Governor Jamaica, I'll take leave to correct your mistake in my own way." "Ah, and what way may that be?" "There's a gallows waiting for this rascal in Port Royal." Blood would have intervened at that, but Lord Julian forestalled him. "I see, sir, that you do not yet quite apprehend the circumstances. If it is a mistake to grant Captain Blood a commission, the mistake is not mine. I am acting upon the instructions of my Lord Sunderland, and with a full knowledge of all the facts, his lordship expressly designated Captain Blood for this commission if Captain Blood could be persuaded to accept it." Colonel Bishop's mouth fell open in surprise and dismay. "Lord Sunderland designated him?" he asked, amazed. "Expressly?" His lordship waited a moment for a reply. None coming from the speechless deputy governor, he asked a question. "Would you still venture to describe a matter as a mistake, sir? And dare you take the risk of correcting it?" I had not dreamed." "I understand, sir. Let me present Captain Blood." Perforce Bishop must put on the best face he could command. But that was no more than a mask for his fury, and his venom was plain to all. From that unpromising beginning matters had not improved. Rather had they grown worse. Blood's thoughts were upon this and other things as he lounged there on the day bed. He had been a fortnight in Port Royal, his ship virtually a unit now in the Jamaica squadron. And when the news of it reached Tortuga and the buccaneers who awaited his return, the name of Captain Blood, which had stood so high among the brethren of the coast, would become a byword, a thing of execration, and before all was done his life might pay forfeit for what would be accounted a treacherous defection. And for what had he placed himself in this position? For the sake of a girl who avoided him so persistently and intentionally that he must assume that she still regarded him with aversion. He had scarcely been vouchsafed a glimpse of her in all this fortnight, although with that in view for his main object, he had daily haunted her uncle's residence, and daily braved the unmasked hostility and baffled rancor in which Colonel Bishop held him. Nor was that the worst of it. He was allowed plainly to perceive that it was a graceful, elegant young trifler from St. James's, Lord Julian Wade, to whom her every moment was devoted. And what chance had he, a desperate adventurer with a record of outlawry, against such a rival as that, a man of parts, moreover, as he was bound to admit? You conceive the bitterness of his soul. He beheld himself to be as a dog in a fable that had dropped the substance to snatch at a delusive shadow. He sought comfort in a line on the open page before him, sought it, but hardly found it. A boat that had approached unnoticed from the shore came scraping and bumping against the great red hull of the Arabella, and a raucous voice sent up a hailing shout. From the ship's belfry 2 silvery notes rang clear and sharp, and a moment or two later the boatswain's whistle shrilled a long wail. The sounds disturbed Captain Blood from his disgruntled musings. He rose, tall, active, and arrestingly elegant in a scarlet, gold-laced coat that advertised his new position, and slipping the slender volume into his pocket, advanced to the card rail of the quarter-deck, just as Jeremy Pitt was setting foot upon the companion. "A note for you from the deputy governor," said the master shortly, as he proffered a folded sheet. Blood broke the seal and read. Pitt, loosely clad in shirt and breeches, leaned against the rail the while and watched him, unmistakable concern imprinted on his fair, frank countenance. Blood uttered a short laugh and curled his lip. "It is a very peremptory summons," he said, and passed the note to his friend. The young master's gray eyes skimmed it. Thoughtfully he stroked his golden beard. "You'll not go," he said, between question and assertion. "Why not? Haven't I been a daily visitor at the fort? But it'll be about the old wolf that he wants to see you. It gives him a grievance at last. You know, Peter, that it is Lord Julian alone has stood between Bishop and his hate of you. If now he can show that—" "What if he can?" Blood interrupted carelessly. "Shall I be in greater danger ashore than aboard, now that we but 50 men left, and they lukewarm rogues who would as soon serve the king as me? Jeremy, dear lad, the Arabella's a prisoner here, bedad, twixt the fort there and the fleet yonder. Don't be forgetting that." Jeremy clenched his hands. "Why did ye let Wolverstone and the others go?" he cried, with a touch of bitterness. "You should have seen the danger. How could I in honesty have detained them? It was in the bargain. Besides, how could their staying have helped me?" And as Pitt did not answer him, "Ye see," he said and shrugged, "I'll be getting my hat and cane and sword, and go ashore in the cockboat. See it manned for me. You're going to deliver yourself into Bishop's hands." Pitt warned him. Well, maybe he'll not find me quite so easy to grasp as he imagines. There's a thorn or two left on me." And with a laugh, Blood departed to his cabin. Jeremy Pitt answered the laugh with an oath. A moment he stood irresolute where Blood had left him. Then slowly, reluctance dragging at his feet, he went down companion to give the order for the cockboat. "If anything should happen to you, Peter," he said, as Blood was going over the side, "Colonel Bishop had better look to himself. These 50 lads may be lukewarm at present, as you say, but sink me, they'll be anything but lukewarm if there's a breach of faith. And what should be happening to me, Jeremy? Sure, now, I'll be back for dinner, so I will." Blood climbed down into the waiting boat, but laugh though he might, he knew as well as Pitt that in going ashore that morning, he carried his life in his hands. Because of this, it may have been that when he stepped on to the narrow mole, in the shadow of the shallow outer wall of the fort through whose crenels were thrust the black noses of its heavy guns, he gave order that the boat should stay for him at that spot. He realized that he might have to retreat in a hurry. Walking leisurely, he skirted the embattled wall and passed through the great gates into the courtyard. Half a dozen soldiers lounged there, and in the shadow cast by the wall, Major Mallard, the commandant, was slowly pacing. He stopped short at sight of Captain Blood and saluted him, as was his due. But the smile that lifted the officer's stiff mustachios was grimly sardonic. Peter Blood's attention, however, was elsewhere. On his right stretched a spacious garden, beyond which rose the White House that was a residence of the deputy governor. In that garden's main avenue, that was fringed with palm and sandalwood, he had caught sight of Miss Bishop alone. He crossed the courtyard with suddenly lengthened stride. "Good morning to ye, ma'am," was his greeting as he overtook her, and hat in hand now, he added on a note of protest, "Sure, it's nothing less than uncharitable to make me run in this heat." "Why do you run, then?" she asked him coolly, standing slim and straight before him, all in white and very maidenly save in her unnatural composure. "I am pressed," she informed him, "so you will forgive me if I do not stay." "You were none so pressed until I came," he protested, and if his thin lips smiled, his blue eyes were oddly hard. "Since you perceive it, sir, I wonder that you trouble to be so insistent." That crossed the sword between them, and it was against Blood's instincts to avoid an engagement. "Faith, you explain yourself after a fashion," said he. "But since it was more or less in your service that I donned the king's coat, you should suffer it to cover the thief and pirate." She shrugged and turned aside, in some resentment and some regret. Fearing to betray the latter, she took refuge in the former. "I do my best," said she, "so that ye can be charitable in some ways." He laughed softly. "Glory be, now. I should be thankful for so much. Maybe I'm presumptuous, but I can't forget that when I was no better than a slave in your uncle's household in Barbados, ye used me with a certain kindness. Why not? In those days you had some claim upon my kindness. You were just an unfortunate gentleman then. And what else would you be calling me now? Hardly unfortunate. We have heard of your good fortune on the seas, how your luck has passed into a byword, and we have heard other things, of your good fortune in other directions." She spoke hastily, the thought of Mademoiselle Diadron in her mind, and instantly would have recalled the words had she been able. But Peter Blood swept them lightly aside, reading into them none of her meaning, as she feared he would. A deal of lies, devil a doubt, as I could prove to you. I cannot think why you should trouble to put yourself on your defense," she discouraged him, "so that ye may think less badly of me than you do. What I think of you can be of very little matter to you, sir." This was a disarming stroke. He abandoned combat for expostulation. "Can ye say that now? Can ye say that, beholding me in this livery of a service I despise? Didn't ye tell me that I might redeem the past? It's little enough I am concerned to redeem the past save only in your eyes. In my own I've done nothing at all that I'm ashamed of, considering the provocation I received." Her glance faltered and fell away before his own that was so intent. I can't think why you should speak to me like this," she said, with less than her earlier assurance. "Ah, now can't ye indeed?" he cried. "Sure, then I'll be telling ye." "Oh, please." There was real alarm in her voice. "I realize fully what you did, and I realize that partly at least you may have been urged by consideration for myself. Believe me, I am very grateful. I shall always be grateful. But if it's also your intention always to think of me as a thief and a pirate, faith, you may keep your gratitude for all the good it's like to do me." A livelier color crept into her cheeks. There was a perceptible heave of the slight breast that faintly swelled the flimsy bodice of white silk. But if she resented his tone and his words, she stifled her resentment. She realized that perhaps she had, herself, provoked his anger. She honestly desired to make amends. "You are mistaken," she began. "It isn't that." But they were fated to misunderstand each other. Jealousy, that trouble of reason, had been over busy with his wits as it had with hers. "What is it, then?" quoth he, and added the question, "Lord Julian?" She started, and stared at him blankly indignant now. "Och, be frank with me," he urged her, unpardonably. "'Twill be a kindness, so will—" For a moment she stood before him with quickened breathing, the color ebbing and flowing in her cheeks. Then she looked past him and tilted her chin forward. You are quite insufferable," she said. "I beg that you will let me pass." He stepped aside and with the broad feathered hat which he still held in his hand, he waved her on towards a house. "I'll not be detaining you any longer, ma'am. After all, the cursed thing I did for nothing can be undone. You'll remember afterwards that it was your hardness drove me." She moved to depart, then checked and faced him again. It was she now who was on her defense, her voice quivering with indignation. "You take that tone. You dare to take that tone," she cried, astounding him by her sudden vehemence. "You have the effrontery to upbraid me, because I will not take your hands when I know how they are stained, when I know you for a murderer and worse." He stared at her open-mouthed. "A murderer? I," he said at last. "Must I name your victims? Did you not murder Levasseur?" "Levasseur?" He smiled a little. "So they've told you about that. Do you deny it?" "I killed him, it is true. I can remember killing another man in circumstances that were very similar. That was in Bridgetown on the night of the Spanish raid. Mary Trail would tell you of it. She was present." He clapped his hat on his head with a certain abrupt fierceness and strode angrily away before she could answer or even grasp the full significance of what he had said. Chapter 23. Hostages. Peter Blood stood in the pillared portico of Government House, and with unseeing eyes that were laden with pain and anger, stared out across the great harbor of Port Royal to the green hills rising from the farther shore and the ridge of the blue mountains beyond, showing hazily through the quivering heat. He was aroused by the return of the Negro who had gone to announce him, and following now this slave, he made his way through the house to the wide piazza behind it, in whose shade Colonel Bishop and my Lord Julian Wade took what little air there was. "So you be come," the deputy governor hailed him, and followed the greeting by a series of grunts of vague, but apparently ill-humored import. He did not trouble to rise, not even when Lord Julian, obeying the instincts of finer breeding, set him the example. From under scowling brows the wealthy Barbados planter considered his sometime slave, who, hat in hand, leaning lightly upon his long beribboned cane, revealed nothing in his countenance of the anger which was being steadily nourished by this cavalier reception. At last, with scowling brow and in self-sufficient tones, Colonel Bishop delivered himself. "I have sent for you, Captain Blood, because of certain news that has just reached me. I am informed that yesterday evening a frigate left the harbor having on board your associate Wolverstone and 100 men of the 150 that were serving under you, his lordship, and I shall be glad to have your explanation of how you came to permit that departure." "Permit?" quoth Blood. "I ordered it." The answer left Bishop speechless for a moment. Then, "You ordered it?" he said in accents of unbelief, whilst Lord Julian raised his eyebrows. "Swans, perhaps you'll explain yourself? Whither has Wolverstone gone?" "To Tortuga. He's gone with a message to the officers commanding the other 4 ships of the fleet that is awaiting me there, telling them what's happened and why they are no longer to expect me." Bishop's great face seemed to swell and its high color to deepen. He swung to Lord Julian. "You hear that, my lord? Deliberately he has let Wolverstone loose upon the seas again. Wolverstone, the worst of all that gang of pirates after himself. I hope your lordship begins at last to perceive the folly of granting the king's commission to such a man as this against all my counsels. Why, this thing it's just mutiny, treason. By God, it's matter for a court-martial. Will you cease your blather of mutiny and treason and courts-martial?" Blood put on his hat and sat down unbidden. "I have sent Wolverstone to inform Hagthorpe and Christian and Iberville and the rest of my lads that they've 1 clear month in which to follow my example, quit piracy, and get back to their boucans or their logwood, or else sail out of the Caribbean Sea. That's what I've done." "But the men," his lordship interposed in his level, cultured voice, "this 100 men that Wolverstone has taken with him, they are those of my crew who have no taste for King James's service, and have preferred to seek work of other kinds. It was in our compact, my lord, that there should be no constraining of my men." "I don't remember it," said his lordship with sincerity. Blood looked at him in surprise. Then he shrugged. "Faith, I'm not to blame for your lordship's poor memory. I say that it was so, and I don't lie. I've never found it necessary. In any case, ye couldn't have supposed that I should consent to anything different." And then the deputy governor exploded. "You have given those damned rascals in Tortuga this warning, so that they may escape. That is what you have done. That is how you abuse the commission that has saved your own neck." Peter Blood considered him steadily, his face impassive. "I will remind you," he said at last very quietly, "that the object in view was, leaving out of account your own appetites, which, as everyone knows, are just those of a hangman, to rid the Caribbean of buccaneers. Now, I've taken the most effective way of accomplishing that object. The knowledge that I've entered the king's service should in itself go far towards disbanding the fleet of which I was until lately the admiral." "I see," sneered the deputy governor malevolently. "And if it does not, it will be time enough then to consider what else is to be done." Lord Julian forestalled a fresh outburst on the part of Bishop. "It is possible," he said, "that my Lord Sunderland will be satisfied, provided that the solution is such as you promise." It was a courteous, conciliatory speech, urged by friendliness towards Blood and understanding of the difficult position in which the buccaneer found himself. His lordship was disposed to take his stand upon the letter of his instructions. Therefore, he now held out a friendly hand to help him over the latest and most difficult obstacle which Blood himself had enabled Bishop to place in the way of his redemption. Unfortunately, the last person from whom Peter Blood desired assistance at that moment was this young nobleman, whom he regarded with the jaundiced eyes of jealousy. "Anyway," he answered, with a suggestion of defiance and more than a suggestion of a sneer, "it's the most you should expect from me, and certainly it's the most you'll get." His lordship frowned and dabbed his lips with a handkerchief. "I don't think that I quite like the way you put it. Indeed, upon reflection, Captain Blood, I am sure that I do not." "I am sorry for that. So I am," said Blood impudently. "But there it is. I'm not on that account concerned to modify it." His lordship's pale eyes opened a little wider. Languidly he raised his eyebrows. "Ah," he said, "you're a prodigiously uncivil fellow. You disappoint me, sir. I had formed the notion that you might be a gentleman." "And that's not your lordship's only mistake," Bishop cut in. "You made a worse when you gave him the king's commission, and so sheltered the rascal from the gallows I had prepared for him in Port Royal." "But the worst mistake of all in this matter of commissions," said Blood to his lordship, "was the one that traded this greasy slaver deputy governor of Jamaica instead of at hangman, which is the office for which he's by nature fitted." "Captain Blood," said his lordship sharply in reproof, "upon my soul and honor, sir, you go much too far. You are—" But here Bishop interrupted him. He had heaved himself to his feet at last, and was venting his fury in unprintable abuse. Captain Blood, who had also risen, stood apparently impassive, for the storm to spend itself. When at last this happened, he addressed himself quietly to Lord Julian, as if Colonel Bishop had not spoken. "Your lordship was about to say?" he asked, with challenging smoothness. But his lordship had by now recovered his habitual composure, and was again disposed to be conciliatory. He laughed and shrugged. "Faith, here's a deal of unnecessary heat," said he, "and God knows this plaguey climate provides enough of that. Perhaps, Colonel Bishop, you are a little uncompromising, and you, sir, are certainly a deal too peppery. I have said, speaking on behalf of my Lord Sunderland, that I am content to await the result of your experiment." But Bishop's fury had by now reached a stage in which it was not to be restrained. "Are you indeed?" he roared. "Well, then I am not. This is a matter in which your lordship must allow me to be the better judge. And, anyhow, I'll take the risk of acting on my own responsibility." Lord Julian abandoned the struggle. He smiled wearily, shrugged, and waved a hand in implied resignation. The deputy governor stormed on. "Since my lord here has given you a commission, I can't regularly deal with you out of hand for piracy as you deserve. But you shall answer before a court-martial for your action in the matter of Wolverstone, and take the consequences." "I see," said Blood. "Now we come to it. And it's yourself as deputy governor will preside over that same court-martial, so that ye can wipe off old scores by hanging me. It's little ye care how ye do it." He laughed and added, "Praemunitus, praemunitus." "What shall that mean?" quoth Lord Julian sharply. "I had imagined that your lordship would have had some education." He was at pains, you see, to be provocative. "It's not the literal meaning I am asking, sir," said Lord Julian with frosty dignity. "I want to know what you desire me to understand." I'll leave your lordship guessing, said Blood, and I'll be wishing you both a very good day. He swept off his feathered hat and made them a leg very elegantly. Before you go, said Bishop, and to save you from any idle rashness, I'll tell you that the harbor master and the commandant have their orders. You don't leave Port Royal, my fine gallows bird. Damn, I mean to provide you with permanent moorings here, in Execution Dock. Peter Blood stiffened, and his vivid blue eyes stabbed the bloated face of his enemy. He passed his long cane into his left hand, and with his right thrust negligently into the breast of his doublet. He swung to Lord Julian, who was thoughtfully frowning. Your lordship, I think, promised me immunity from this. What I may have promised, said his lordship, your own conduct makes it difficult to perform. He rose. You did me a service, Captain Blood, and I had hoped that we might be friends. But since you prefer to have it otherwise... He shrugged and waved a hand towards the deputy governor. Blood completed the sentence in his own way. You mean that ye haven't the strength of character to resist the urgings of a bully. He was apparently at his ease, and actually smiling. Well, as I said before, premonitus. I'm afraid that you're no scholar, Bishop, or ye'd know that I mean forewarned, forearmed. Forewarned? Ha! Bishop almost snarled. The warning comes a little late. You do not leave this house. He took a step in the direction of the doorway and raised his voice. Ho, there, he was beginning to call. Then with a sudden audible catch in his breath, he stopped short. Captain Blood's right hand had reemerged from the breast of his doublet, bringing with it a long pistol with silver mountings richly chased, which he leveled within a foot of the deputy governor's head. And forearmed, said he, don't stir from where you are, my lord, or there may be an accident. And my lord, who had been moving to Bishop's assistance, stood instantly arrested, chapfallen. When much of his high color suddenly departed, the deputy governor was swaying on unsteady legs. Peter Blood considered him with a grimness that increased his panic. I marvel that I don't pistol you without more ado, ye fat blackguard. If I don't, it's for the same reason that once before I gave you your life when it was forfeit. Ye not aware of the reason, to be sure, but it may comfort ye to know that it exists. At the same time, I'll warn ye not to put too heavy a strain on my generosity, which resides at the moment in my trigger finger. Ye mean to hang me, and since that's the worst that can happen to me anyway, you'll realize that I'll not boggle at increasing the account by spilling your nasty blood. He cast his cane from him, thus disengaging his left hand. Be good enough to give me your arm, Colonel Bishop. Come, man, your arm. Under compulsion of that sharp tone, those resolute eyes, and that gleaming pistol, Bishop obeyed without demur. His recent foul volubility was stemmed. He could not trust himself to speak. Captain Blood tucked his left arm through the deputy governor's proffered right. Then he thrust his own right hand with its pistol back into the breast of his doublet. Though invisible, it's aiming at ye nonetheless. And I give you my word of honor that I'll shoot ye dead upon the very least provocation, whether that provocation is yours or another's. Ye'll bear that in mind, Lord Julian. And now, ye greasy hangman, step out as brisk and lively as ye can, and behave as naturally as ye may, or it's the black stream of cositis ye'll be contemplating. Arm in arm they passed through the house, and down the garden, where Arabella lingered, awaiting Peter Blood's return. Consideration of his parting words had brought her first turmoil of mind, then a clear perception of what might be indeed the truth of the death of Leigh Vasseur. She perceived that the particular inference drawn from it might similarly have been drawn from Blood's deliverance of Mary Trail. When a man so risks his life for a woman, the rest is easily assumed. For the men who will take such risks without hope of personal gain are few. Blood was of those few, as he had proved in the case of Mary Trail. It needed no further assurances of his to convince her that she had done him a monstrous injustice. She remembered words he had used, words overheard aboard his ship, which he had named the Arabella, on the night of her deliverance from the Spanish admiral. Words he had uttered when she had approved his acceptance of the king's commission, the words he had spoken to her that very morning, which had but served to move her indignation. All these assumed a fresh meaning in her mind, delivered now from its unwarranted preconceptions. Therefore she lingered there in the garden, awaiting his return that she might make amends, that she might set a term to all misunderstanding. In impatience she awaited him. Yet her patience, it seemed, was to be tested further. For when at last he came, it was in company, unusually close and intimate company, with her uncle. In vexation, she realized that explanations must be postponed. Could she have guessed the extent of that postponement? Vexation would have been changed into despair. He passed, with a companion, from that fragrant garden into the courtyard of the fort. Here the commandant, who had been instructed to hold himself in readiness with the necessary men against the need to effect the arrest of Captain Blood, was amazed by the curious spectacle of the deputy governor of Jamaica strolling forth arm in arm, and apparently on the friendliest terms with the intended prisoner. For as they went, Blood was chatting and laughing briskly. They passed out of the gates unchallenged, and so came to the mole where the cockboat from the Arabella was waiting. They took their places side by side in the stern sheets, and were pulled away together, always very close and friendly, to the great red ship where Jeremy Pitt so anxiously awaited news. You conceive the master's amazement to see the deputy governor come toiling up the entrance ladder, with Blood following very close behind him. Sure, I walked into a trap, as he feared Jeremy. Blood hailed him. But I walked out again and fetched the trapper with me. He loves his life, does this fat rascal. Colonel Bishop stood in the waist, his great face blenched to the color of clay, his mouth loose, almost afraid to look at the sturdy ruffians who lounged about the shot rack on the main hatch. Blood shouted an order to the boatswain, who was leaning against the forecastle bulkhead. "Throw me a rope with a running noose over the yardarm there, against the need of it. Now, don't be alarming yourself. Colonel, darling, it's no more than provision against your being unreasonable, which I am sure ye'll not be. We'll talk the matter over whiles we are dining, for I trust ye'll not refuse to honor my table by your company." He led away the will-less, cowed bully to the great cabin. Benjamin, the Negro steward, in white drawers and cotton shirt, made haste by command to serve dinner. Colonel Bishop collapsed on a locker under the stern ports, and spoke now for the first time. "May I ask, what are your intentions?" he quavered. "Why, nothing sinister, Colonel. Although ye deserve nothing less than that same rope and yardarm, I assure you that it's to be employed only as a last resource. E.V. said his lordship made a mistake when he handed me the commission which the Secretary of State did me the honor to design for me. I'm disposed to agree with you, so I'll take to the sea again. Cras ingens iterabimus equor. It's the fine lad and scholar ye'll be when I've done with ye. I'll be getting back to Tortuga and my buccaneers, who at least are honest, decent fellows. So I fetched ye aboard as a hostage." "My God!" groaned the deputy governor. Ye never mean that ye'll carry me to Tortuga." Blood laughed outright. "Oh, I never served ye such a bad turn as that. No. All I want is that ye ensure my safe departure from Port Royal. And if ye're reasonable, I'll not even trouble you to swim for it this time. Ye've given certain orders to your harbor master, and others to the commandant of your plaguey fort. Ye'll be so good as to send for them both aboard here, and inform them in my presence that the Arabella is leaving this afternoon on the King's service, and is to pass out unmolested. And so as to make quite sure their obedience, they shall go a little voyage with us themselves. Here's what you require. Now write, unless you prefer the yardarm." Colonel Bishop heaved himself up in a pet. "You constrain me with violence," he was beginning. Blood smoothly interrupted him. "Sure now, I am not constraining you at all. I'm giving you a perfectly free choice between the pen and the rope. It's a matter for yourself entirely." Bishop glared at him. Then, shrugging heavily, he took up the pen and sat down at the table. In an unsteady hand, he wrote that summons to his officers. Blood dispatched it ashore, and then bade his unwilling guest a table. "I trust, Colonel, your appetite is as stout as usual." The wretched bishop took the seat to which he was commanded. As for eating, however, that was not easy to man in his position, nor did Blood press him. The captain himself fell to with a good appetite. But before he was midway through the meal, came Hayton to inform him that Lord Julian Wade had just come aboard, and was asking to see him instantly. "I was expecting him," said Blood. "Fetch him in." Lord Julian came. He was very stern and dignified. His eyes took in the situation at a glance, as Captain Blood rose to greet him. "It's mighty friendly of you to have joined us, my lord." "Captain Blood," said his lordship with asperity. "I find your humor a little forced. I don't know what may be your intentions, but I wonder, do you realize the risks you are running? And I wonder, does your lordship realize the risk to yourself in following us aboard as I had counted that you would? What shall that mean, sir?" Blood signaled to Benjamin, who was standing behind Bishop. "Set a chair for his lordship. Hayton, send his lordship's boat ashore. Tell them he'll not be returning yet a while." "What's that?" cried his lordship. "Blister me. Do you mean to detain me? Are ye mad?" "Better wait, Hayton, in case his lordship should turn violent," said Blood. "You, Benjamin, you heard the message. Deliver it." "Will you tell me what you intend, sir?" demanded his lordship, quivering with anger. "Just to make myself and my lads here safe from Colonel Bishop's gallows. I've said that I trusted to your gallantry not to leave him in the lurch, but to follow him hither, and there's a note from his hand gone ashore to summon the harbor master and the commandant of the fort. Once they are aboard, I shall have all the hostages I need for our safety." "You scoundrel," said his lordship through his teeth. "Sure, now, that's entirely a matter of the point of view," said Blood. "Ordinarily, it isn't the kind of name I could suffer any man to apply to me. Still, considering that you willingly did me a service once, and that you're likely unwillingly to do me another now, I'll overlook your discourtesy. So I will." His lordship laughed. "You fool," he said. "Do you dream that I came aboard your pirate ship without taking my measures? I informed the commandant of exactly how you had compelled Colonel Bishop to accompany you. Judge now whether he or the harbor master will obey the summons, or whether you'll be allowed to depart as you imagine." Blood's face became grave. "I'm sorry for that," said he. "I thought you would be," answered his lordship. "Oh, but not on my own account. It's the deputy governor there I'm sorry for. Do you know what you've done?" "Sure. Now, you very likely hanged him." "My God!" cried Bishop in a sudden increase of panic. "If they so much as put a shot across my bows, up goes their deputy governor to the yardarm. Your only hope, Colonel, lies in the fact that I shall send them word of that intention. And so that you may mend as far as you can harm you have done, it's yourself shall bear them the message, my lord." "I'll see you damned before I do," fumed his lordship. "Why?" "That's unreasonable and unreasoning. But if ye insist, why, another messenger will do as well, and another hostage aboard, as I had originally intended, will make my hand the stronger." Lord Julian stared at him, realizing exactly what he had refused. "You'll think better of it now that ye understand?" quoth Blood. "Aye, in God's name. Go, my lord," spluttered Bishop, "and make yourself obeyed. This damned pirate has me by the throat." His lordship surveyed him with an eye that was not by any means admiring. "Why, if that is your wish," he began. Then he shrugged and turned again to Blood. "I suppose I can trust you that no harm will come to Colonel Bishop if you are allowed to sail?" "You have my word for it," said Blood, "and also that I shall put him safely ashore again without delay." Lord Julian bowed stiffly to the cowering deputy governor. "You understand, sir, that I do as you desire," he said coldly. "Aye, man, aye." Bishop assented hastily. "Very well." Lord Julian bowed again and took his departure. Blood escorted him to the entrance ladder, at the foot of which still swung the Arabella's own cockboat. "It's goodbye, my lord," said Blood. "And there's another thing." He proffered a parchment that he had drawn from his pocket. "It's the commission. Bishop was right when he said it was a mistake." Lord Julian considered him, and considering him his expression softened. "I am sorry," he said sincerely. "In other circumstances," began Blood. "Oh, but there—" "You'll understand. The boat's waiting." Yet with his foot on the first rung of the ladder, Lord Julian hesitated. "I still do not perceive, blister me if I do, why you should not found someone else to carry your message to the commandant, and kept me aboard as an added hostage for his obedience to your wishes." Blood's vivid eyes looked into the others that were clear and honest, and he smiled a little wistfully. A moment he seemed to hesitate. Then he explained himself quite fully. "Why shouldn't I tell you? It's the same reason that's been urging me to pick a quarrel with you, so that I might have the satisfaction of slipping a couple of feet of steel into your vitals. When I accepted your commission, I was moved to think it might redeem me in the eyes of Miss Bishop, for whose sake, as you may have guessed, I took it. But I have discovered that such a thing is beyond accomplishment. I should have known it for a sick man's dream. I have discovered also that if she's choosing you, as I believe she is, she's choosing wisely between us. And that's why I'll not have your life risked by keeping you aboard whilst the message goes by another who might bungle it. And now perhaps ye'll understand." Lord Julian stared at him bewildered. His long, aristocratic face was very pale. "My God," he said, "and you tell me this?" "I tell you because, oh, plague on it, so that you may tell her, so that she may be made to realize that there's something of the unfortunate gentleman left under the thief and pirate she accounts me, and that her own good is my supreme desire, knowing that she may, faith, she may remember me more kindly, if it's only in her prayers. That's all, my lord." Lord Julian continued to look at the buccaneer in silence. In silence, at last, he held out his hand, and in silence Blood took it. "I wonder whether you are right," said his lordship, "and whether you are not the better man. Where she is concerned, see that you make sure that I am right. Goodbye to you." Lord Julian wrung his hand in silence, went down the ladder, and was pulled ashore. From the distance, he waved to Blood, who stood leaning on the bulwarks watching the receding cockboat. The Arabella sailed within the hour, moving lazily before a sluggish breeze. The fort remained silent, and there was no movement from the fleet to hinder her departure. Lord Julian had carried the message effectively, and had added to it his own personal commands.